Chapter 133. Two people, a man and a hermaphrodite, were laughing loudly in the private room, as if they had encountered something extremely happy. Their laughter seemed to shake the entire private room. Yang Qindong, who had been waiting outside, carefully paid attention to the movements in the room. When the laughter came out without restraint, he guessed a possibility. He felt that the matter had been settled, and it should be time for him to appear. He immediately waved his hand, and a waiter brought over a delicacy that had just been prepared. Taking this opportunity, he pushed the door open and entered. Yang Qindong's sudden entry did not affect the hearty laughter of the ruler and official. Wang Zhen even had the intention to show off to him. "Qindong, quickly come and pay your respects to the wisest and greatest emperor in our history. The emperor is going to personally lead the troops to Walla." As he spoke, Wang Zhen gave Yang Qindong a look. Personally lead the troops. Yang Qindong appeared to be very surprised on the surface, but in his heart, he thought that it was indeed so. If one did not seek death, one would not die. Zhu Qizhen was jumping into the fire pit himself. As a bystander, he was afraid that he would not be able to stop him. Yang Qindong's surprised look was seen by Zhu Qizhen. Does Minister Yang have a different opinion? Yang Qindong, what do you mean? Wang Zhen had given countless looks just now because he was afraid that Yang Qindong would get in the way. At this moment, in order to prevent the other party from speaking rudely, he even directly called out the official's name. From this, it could be seen that if Yang Qindong said something wrong, he would dare to let the Hu Ben soldiers outside rush in and throw him into the imperial prison. Feeling Wang Zhen's threat and the emperor's suspicion, how could Yang Qindong not know what to say? Personally lead the troops. This is really too good. Since ancient times, a famous emperor must be proficient in both the pen and the sword. Looking at our Ming dynasty now, the sea is peaceful and peaceful. Your Majesty has already seen results in governing the country through the use of the pen. If you personally go on an expedition, it can really be said that no one has ever done it before. Yang Qindong's praise was even similar to what Wang Zhen had said just now. Immediately, the two people in the room were overjoyed. When Wang Zhen saw that Yang Qindong was so tactful, he was very happy. He smiled and said, as the saying goes, great minds think alike. In the past, I didn't believe it, but now, I have no choice but to believe it. That's right, Mr. and Minister Yang have the same opinion. It seems that this time, we must personally lead the troops to prove the might of our nation, ha ha ha. Zhu Qizhen also laughed in agreement. Not only could he make a name for himself, but he could also go out and have fun. This was a good opportunity to gain both fame and fortune. No matter how he looked at it, it was a good opportunity. However, at this time, Zhu Qizhen didn't even think about the possibility of losing the war. Perhaps in his eyes, he had never regarded Walla as a great enemy. During the time of Emperor Cheng, the strength of the nation was not as strong as it was now. They were still defeated by the Mongol Empire. Now, after decades of development, they really didn't see the slightest possibility of losing the war. This attitude attracted the praise of the emperor and Wang Zhen. Yang Qindong also pretended to have a flushed face and laughed at the side. However, as he laughed, he suddenly knelt on the ground and said with a very determined attitude, "Your Majesty, this subject has a request. I hope that your Majesty will agree." "Oh? What is it? Let's hear it." Zhu Qizhen was in a good mood at this time, so his attitude towards Yang Qindong was naturally very good. Even Wang Zhen, who was at the side, was prepared to help Yang Qindong. After all, the other party cooperated with him so much. Even if it was to return the favor, he still had to make a move when it was necessary. Under the attention of four people, Yang Qindong's heart was set. He knew that his request would definitely be approved. He immediately raised his head and cupped his hands and said, "Your Majesty, although this subject has a low position and is idle, I still consider myself a part of the great Ming Empire. Since your Majesty is going to personally lead the army, this subject requests to accompany you. I also want to admire your Majesty's heroic actions and the scene of your victory. When you return in triumph, this subject will definitely record everything and arrange it into a dance song to let the whole world know of your Majesty's greatness and wisdom. There were also different levels of flattery. When Yang Qindong said this, it immediately scratched Zhu Qizhen's itch. He thought that victory indeed needed someone to record it. Although historians would record it, it was only words on paper. How could it be more intuitive and moving than a dance song? Immediately, he was overjoyed and agreed, "Good, good. Yang Shi's loyalty is commendable. We will allow him to play." Wang Zhen, who was at the side, was also very happy. Yang Qindong took the initiative to ask to accompany the emperor. Didn't this mean that he was also optimistic about this battle? As such, no words were more effective than action. At this time, he looked at Yang Qindong with an increasingly happy gaze. "Thank you, Your Majesty." Yang Qindong hurriedly expressed his gratitude and then stood up with a happy expression. He had decided to personally lead the army. Zhu Qizhen couldn't wait for even a moment. It was as if victory was right in front of him, and if he was a step late, the merit would belong to someone else. He didn't watch the song and dance he ordered and didn't eat the delicious food he ordered. He hurriedly left the immortal residence with Wang Zhen. After the emperor left, Yang Qindong also called Mu Lily, who was on duty, to return to the Yang family manor. Everyone who had received the news was currently waiting in the main hall of the manor, waiting for the sixth young master to call for a meeting. Not everyone was present at the meeting. Yang Qindong first met with Xiao Yin, Madame Shui, Madame Xiang, Dong Hanxiang, as well as the two foremen of the immortal residence, Mu Lily and Cui Na. In the main hall, Yang Qindong was extremely solemn and serious. The five women were also affected by the atmosphere, and their expressions became much more serious. Even Madame Shui, who used to throw flirtatious glances at Yang Qindong in the past, retracted her seductive gaze at this time. Madame Xiang was very beautiful. She had an elegant temperament, and her figure was also very voluptuous. According to the previous book, she was different from Madame Shui, who looked like Su Qing. She looked more like a young Guanjilin. With her big eyes and towering breasts, there were very few men who could control themselves after seeing her. However, Yang Qindong was one of those rare men. It wasn't that he wasn't moved, but rather that he hadn't been able to find the right opportunity. Madame Xiang's dance was beautiful, and her talent in this field was outstanding. There were many performances in the immortal residence that required her to rehearse, so there wasn't enough time. With Xiao Yin and Madame Shui, Yang Qindong didn't insist on it. When it came to women, what he liked was the feeling of success when the conditions were right, and not the feeling of doing something in a hurry. In his opinion, that kind of combination would deprive him of a sense of beauty. It wasn't something he liked. This time, he called the five women over. Yang Qindong didn't waste any time on pleasantries. He went straight to the point and mentioned that he was about to follow the emperor to the border. Upon hearing that there was going to be a war, and that the sixth young master was going to personally take part, the five women couldn't help but show a hint of concern. In contrast, Mu Lily and Cui Na were much more reserved, but Xiao Yin, Madame Shui, and Madame Xiang all had expressions of reluctance and concern. There were even tears in their eyes that seemed ready to pour down at any moment. Enough. Going to war with the emperor, the young master is a civil official, so he won't be in any danger. As for the rest of you, once I'm gone, I'm afraid that the capital will fall into chaos. You must not panic. If you encounter a situation where things can't be controlled, immediately retreat to the Yang clan manor. I will arrange for people to protect you here. Yang Qindong's face was brimming with confidence when it came to his own safety, but he truly couldn't be at ease when it came to these women. All of them were heavenly beauties. Once the capital fell into chaos, who knew if some of them would be tempted by lust and take risks? For the sake of their safety, Yang Qindong had intentionally left Dao Zhao's group of 10 and the Ghost Shadow Sniper squad in the Yang clan manor. Yang Si, Yang Lu, and Yang San of the Security Bureau had been left in the capital, so there shouldn't be any problems. But he was still worried that these women wouldn't be willing to abandon the immortal abode in the face of danger, which was why he had called them to this meeting. He had only one goal in mind, in times of danger, everyone in the immortal abode had to retreat to the manor. As for whether or not the immortal abode would be plundered by others, he couldn't care less. It was impossible to take care of everything in the first place. Since he had intentionally warned them about this, he believed that the girls would not panic too much if something were to happen. "Young master, didn't you say that there wouldn't be any danger? Why did you make such an arrangement?" Xiao Yin had followed Yang Chendong for a long time, and she was the woman who understood him the best. She had been to Crimson City before, and she was well aware of just how powerful that place was. Even with such tyrannical strength, Yang Chendong had still made such an order. Xiao Yin couldn't help but think about it. There's always a what if in everything. Aren't I just preparing for the worst? Haha. Yang Chendong winked at Xiao Yin, his eyes gleaming. Xiao Yin's mental defenses crumbled, and she didn't say anything else. He quickly made appropriate arrangements for the women. After they left, Tiger's Mane, Beta Persei, Yang Wu, 1st Battalion Commander Xiao Feng, 1st Squad Commander Chiu Vi, 2nd Squad Commander Dao Xiao, Ghost Shadow Sniper Squad Commander Bai Zhua, and the others stood in the main hall. None of them sat down. They all had solemn expressions as they waited for Yang Chendong to give them orders. Very good. You don't panic in the face of trouble. This is a necessary quality for a leader. This young master hopes that you can remain as calm as you are now. Yang Chendong's gaze swept over everyone. Soldiers are trained for 1,000 days to be used in a single moment. You've all been in hiding for so long. Now, it's time for you to show your prowess. Now, I order. Everyone had gone through strict military training and formation training. As soon as the command was given, everyone tensed up their bodies, put their feet together, and stood at attention. Satisfied with everyone's performance, Yang Chendong said, "I order." Chapter 134. Within the palace, they were also nervously making preparations. Compared to the order in the Yang village, this place was much more chaotic. Zhu Qizhen was afraid that a long delay would lead to trouble, and that the ministers would oppose him when they heard the news. Zhu Qizhen privately ordered Wang Zhen to make full preparations before the war, striving to set out as early as possible. He was already eager to go out and show off. Naturally, this was also what Wang Zhen wanted. Whether or not he could seize military power would depend on his performance this time. He called all his disciples and grand disciples over. More than half of the eunuchs began to move. They mobilized troops and issued orders. They were extremely busy. Wang Zhen, who did not know anything about military matters, did not have enough understanding of Walla's attacks. He thought that by letting Ying Zong personally lead the troops, he would be able to scare the Walla troops away. Hence, to win by luck, he decided to make Ying Zong personally lead the troops when the Ming dynasty was not fully prepared. He wanted Ying Zong to follow Song Zhenzong's example and leave a good name in history. Ying Zong usually listened to Wang Zhen. This time, when he heard Wang Zhen's words, he felt that this was a good chance for him to show off his skills. Hence, he did not discuss with the officials and made the decision. He also announced that they would set out in 2 days. The moment Ying Zong personally led the troops, all the officials were shocked. When the officials found out, they immediately used Minister of War Kuang Yi to say, "It is not good for the 6th master to go out." Minister of Personnel Wang Zhen led the officials to advise against it. Reports of the defeat at the Datong frontlines continued to spread to the imperial capital. These military uniforms that annoyed people in the past were like soul-reaping messengers in Zhu Qizhen's eyes. Since he had already made his decision and was attracted by the results of the victory, Ying Zong totally trusted Wang Zhen and insisted on personally leading the troops. As for the advice of the officials, he did not care at all. Now that the emperor had given his imperial decree, after a series of useless remonstrations, the only thing that the officials could do was to be appointed by him. Since the emperor was personally leading the troops, the number of officials following him naturally could not be small. If not, wouldn't they become a joke? Regarding this point, Wang Zhen quickly made preparations. A total of 100 officials and civil servants were present. Similar to history, even the people following the emperor were the same. The only change was that Yu Qian, the left assistant minister of the Bureau of Military Personnel, was absent from the capital. Without this pillar of support at this crucial moment, there was a hint of uncertainty as to whether or not the defense of the capital would begin, how it would begin, and how it would end. In just a few days, all the soldiers in the capital had mobilized. 500,000 soldiers from the northern provinces had gathered in the capital, and under Zhu Qijian's personal command, they were ready to leave the capital to reinforce Datong on the second day. There was going to be a big battle, and the emperor was going to personally lead the troops. Regarding this, the common people naturally raised both hands in agreement. Since the establishment of the Ming dynasty, the people of the Ming dynasty had never experienced defeat in a foreign war. As such, they were very confident in their own army. Compared to the common people who did not know what was going on, some important officials had a different view. For example, in the home of the Minister of Rights, Hu Shao, he did not have a good opinion of the emperor going on an expedition. In the study of the Hu residence, Hu Shao and his eldest son, Hu Zhangning, were analyzing the situation of the battle. On the table was the battle report from the front lines. On it was written as follows: East, Tuachuo Buhua and Wulianya attacked Liaodong. West, other generals attacked Ganzhou, Zhangye of Gansu. The center was the focus of the attack and was split into two. One was led by Alashiyuan and attacked Red City of the Xuanfu. The other was led by Yeshen and attacked Datong. Yeshen's attack on Datong was led by his troops were very sharp. The Datong army lost, and the castle outside the Great Wall was destroyed. Datong's general Wu Hao died in Mao village. The Ming dynasty's constable commandant Jing Yuan and the other three generals each led 10,000 men to defend against the enemy. Father, Walla's army came prepared, but our army was in a hurry to fight. In this situation, we should fight slowly. With the strength of the Ming dynasty, we can slowly win. I really don't understand why the emperor wants to personally lead the troops. Isn't this too risky? Although Hu Zhangning was part of the embroidered uniform guard, he had good talent in military affairs. When he analyzed the situation, he hit the nail on the head. That's right. Very satisfied with his son's insight, Hu Cheng nodded approvingly. However, his expression quickly became very helpless as he said, Minister Kwang of the Ministry of War, Minister Wang of the Ministry of Appointments, and other important officials all tried to persuade him, but the emperor did not listen. What can we do? Just as Hu Cheng showed a helpless expression, Hu Yan rushed in from outside the study. Once she entered the study, before she could catch her breath, she said anxiously, Grandfather, Father, did he go as well? Can we not let him go? Needless to say, everyone knew who she was referring to. Faced with this question, Hu Cheng first nodded and then shook his head. Yang Shima is indeed on the list of people accompanying the emperor. However, I heard that he asked for it. Furthermore, the army is leaving tomorrow. Unless he asks for it himself and needs a good reason, no one can stop it. I'll go find him now. After Hu Yan heard this, her lips pressed together tightly and she turned to leave. Wait. Hu Zhangning suddenly called out to his daughter, Yan, you are still a girl after all. Not to mention that the Yang family has not given you a betrothal gift, even if they did, it doesn't count until you are married. Why are you going now? Be good and stay at home. Father. Hearing that Hu Zhangning was stopping her from going, Hu Yan's face immediately became anxious. Although she was not married, her heart had long been tied to Yang Qindong. As if he knew what kind of personality his daughter had, after Hu Zhangning stopped her, he directly shouted outside the study, Is Lieutenant Sun Shuang here? Here. Sun Shuang, who was responsible for security outside the door, immediately responded. Watch the young Mississippi. Without my order, she is not allowed to leave the house. Hu Zhangning ordered loudly. When a man went to the battlefield, his head was tied to his belt. No one could guarantee that he would return safely. If there was a problem, his daughter would still have to marry. At this moment, he naturally had to keep his reputation intact. Hu Yan's matter was ultimately just a small episode. The next morning, on the 16th of July 1449 AD, Ingzong ordered his brother, Zhu Qiyu, to to guard the capital. Zhu Qizhen and Wang Zhen gathered an army of 500,000 in a few days, randomly allocated some food and weapons, and hurriedly set off. Along with Yingzong and Wang Zhen were Duke Ying Zhangfu, Minister of War Kuang Yi, Minister of Revenue Wang Zhua, Cabinet Scholars Chao Nai, Zhang Yi, Crown Prince Yang Qindong, and more than 100 other civil and military officials. However, Yingzong did not allow them to participate in military and political affairs, leaving all military and political power to Wang Zhen alone. Due to the improper organization, all military and political affairs were arbitrarily decided by Wang Zhen. Duke Qinghua Zhu Yong was a general, but in front of Wang Zhen, he had to kneel. Minister of Revenue Wang Zhua asked the emperor to return to the army, and Wang Zhen ordered him to kneel in the grass until the sky turned dark. The civil and military officials accompanying the expedition were not allowed to participate in military and political affairs, and the army was in chaos. Yang Qindong was also among the officials, and not only that, he even asked Wang Zhen for a position in the army. This was also a reward for Wang Zhen to thank Yang Qindong for taking the initiative to speak up for him in the immortal abode. It was precisely because of this that the sixth young master was able to arrange for his own people to serve by his side. The so-called own people naturally referred to Tiger Mane, Beta Persei, Yang Wu, and Qiu V's first guard, as well as Xiao Feng's first company of cold-edge soldiers. As long as Yang Qindong didn't interfere, the outcome of this battle was obvious. Once they were surrounded by Walla's army, it would be very dangerous without sufficient strength to protect them. Yang Qindong had only just transferred the first company of cold-edge soldiers over, and it was also at this time that he began to bare his fangs. This was one of the benefits of joining the army. Although he didn't have any real authority, especially under Wang Zhen's leadership, he could still arrange for a few people to serve by his side. The chaos of the army also brought benefits to his arrangements. At the very least, no one cared or questioned him. Similarly, because the preparations for this expedition had been rushed and poorly organized, the army was in chaos not long after they set out. Before they even reached Datong, the army was already running low on food. People were dying one after another, and corpses covered half the road. It had to be said that because the army had been assembled too hastily, the gathering of 500,000 soldiers had been extremely chaotic from the start. Just how chaotic was it? The Minister of War, Kuang Yi, had fallen off his horse due to the crowd. The Minister of War was the equivalent of the current Minister of Defense. Even he had fallen into chaos, so one could only imagine how poorly organized and disciplined the army was. How could such an army possibly win a battle? They didn't care about the situation of the enemy, nor did they discuss battle plans. They didn't even arrange for logistical support, treating this expedition like a child's game. Wang Zhen was in charge of all military affairs, and the accompanying civil and military officials didn't participate. This was simply an amateur commanding an expert. Yang Qindong didn't say anything about Wang Zhen's random orders. He knew that even if he wanted to say something, the other party probably wouldn't listen. Since that was the case, all they could do was wait and see what would happen, as well as do what they could. For example, the Minister of Revenue, Wang Zhua, wasn't young anymore. Seeing him kneel in the grass, Wang Zhua had personally delivered a thick praying mat to him. The commander of the embroidered uniform guard, Ji Guang, had seen everything clearly and reported this matter to Wang Zhen. Wang Zhen was very busy and wanted to get involved in everything, big or small, so that everyone could do as he wished. When he heard the report that it was Yang Qindong's doing, he only frowned and waved his hand. Let him go. Record everything about him and we'll talk about it later. Of course, he wasn't letting him go out of the kindness of his heart. Wang Zhen wanted to record everything and interrogate Yang Qindong to see if he could extort more silver. Chapter 135. Yang Qindong walked up to Wang Zhua and placed the thick prayer mat under the legs of the Minister of Revenue. This small action caused tears to well up in the eyes of this 65-year-old man. This small action was not to be underestimated, but none of the other officials would dare to do it. They didn't even have the ability to protect themselves, much less help others. Yang Qindong, it's not worth it for you to do this. Wang Zhen will definitely hold a grudge against you. Once he returns to the court, he'll probably settle everything, Wang Zhou kindly reminded Yang Qindong. It's fine. Respecting the old and loving the young is one of the virtues. Even if someone tries to blame me, I'll just explain myself to him. Yang Qindong nonchalantly smiled. But in his heart, he was thinking, will Wang Zhen return to the court? Hearing Yang Qindong talk about virtues, Wang Zhu's tears flowed down his face. He was so moved that he didn't know what to say. Seeing that the old man was crying like a child, Yang Qindong squatted down, took out a handkerchief, and handed it over. Lord Wang, you still have to take care of your body. It's very windy outside. Quickly dry your tears. It won't be good if you get an eye disease again. Okay. Thank you, Yang Qindong. Wang Zhu took the handkerchief and wiped his eyes, his heart filled with gratitude. It was said that a friend in need was a friend indeed. Yang Qindong had barely left the capital, but he had already begun to win over the hearts of his people. And this was only the beginning. It could only be described as the first meeting of a towering figure. The army left Jianghu Pass on the 19th and arrived at the Xian Manor. On the 28th, they arrived at the southern part of Jianghu City. It could be said that the army moved very quickly. Jianghu City was one of the 72 castles of Datong in the Ming Dynasty. It was 4,600 meters long, and the city walls were 11.6 meters high. There was also a trench that was 10 meters deep. There was a barbican built inside and outside the city gate, which was the ancient battlefield where Liu Bang was besieged by Bai Deng. During the Yuan dynasty, it was called Bai Deng County. 10 days before Ingzong's army arrived, on the 15th day of the 7th month, the Ming army engaged in an intense battle with Yeshen. A total of 40,000 Ming soldiers were defeated by the Walla army. Even Datong provincial governor Song Ying, prince consort Jing Yuan, and Zhu Mian all died in battle. From this, one could see the heavy casualties. When the Ying Sek's army arrived, the battlefield had not been cleaned up yet. Corpses of the Ming dynasty's army were strewn all over, and there was an unpleasant smell and a fearful atmosphere. This dealt a heavy blow to the Ming dynasty's army, and some of the more cowardly ones started to desert. Ingzong continued to advance. He wanted to find Walla's main force for a decisive battle, but at this time, Yeshen withdrew his forces and retreated beyond the Great Wall. 8th month, 1st day, the Ming army entered the strategic city of Datong, wanting to reach a standstill with the Walla army. Who knew that Yeshen did not choose to fight head-on? Instead, he retreated north to lure the Ming army in. Although Datong was a strategic city, it was unable to support such a huge logistical supply. Seeing that the chances of a decisive battle were slim, and the army continued to stay here, not only would it not be of any use, but they would also suffer heavy losses every day. Thus, the officials all suggested to move back to the court. Yang Qindong did not follow the officials to ask the emperor. Instead, he looked on coldly from the side. Just from the situation at that time, the decision to move back to the court was the right one. Although they had mobilized so many people and did not achieve anything, at least the army did not suffer any heavy losses. At this moment, not only did Yang Qindong see this point, but even Zhu Qizhen and Wang Zhen, the actual commander of the army, also saw this point. The Battle of Datong had started under Wang Zhen's instructions. He had sent Datong's general Song Ying and military governor Shiheng to fight with Walla. In his mind, the two of them were more than enough to take care of them first. This way, when he arrived, he could put on a show and show off. There was no need to really fight. Speaking of which, if they really fought, Wang Zhen might not have the guts to do so. Wang Zhen was worried that Song Ying and Shiheng would not go all out, so he arranged for his trusted eunuch Guo Jing to be the army supervisor. Under the urging of this eunuch, the two sides fought. Due to their eagerness to fight, they fell into Yeshen's ambush. Furthermore, because of Guo Jing, a portion of Song Ying's army was wiped out. Shiheng and Guo Jing escaped and talked about how strong Walla was, which scared Wang Zhen. Since the civil and military officials were all trying to persuade him to retreat, he chose to follow the wishes of everyone and agreed. Since they decided to retreat, they were not far from Datong, so there would not be any danger. They could just treat it as a vacation for 500,000 people. On the third day of the 8th month, the Ming army decided to retreat. Datong Deputy General Guo Deng suggested that they retreat from Zijing Pass to Beijing. This would be far away from Walla's possible attack route and would be relatively safe. However, Wang Zhen once again stood out and gave a different suggestion. For Wang Zhen to have his current position, it was because of his opportunistic nature. However, it was because of this that he acted like a small person and was used to showing off wherever he went. Now that he knew how strong the Walla cavalry was, he knew that he could not fight. However, if he went back just like that, he would feel some regret. As such, he decided to satisfy his desire to show off. He suggested not returning to Datong but to Xianxia Yuzhou, Wang Zhen's hometown. He wanted to use this chance to show off. When he left Xianxia Yuzhou, Wang Zhen was still a poor man. Now that he had unlimited power, he wanted to return to his hometown and show off. Due to Wang Zhen's insistence and the fact that Zhu Qizhen agreed, the army could only head towards Xianxia Yuzhou. However, just as they were about to reach Yuzhou and were 40 miles away from Zijing Pass, Wang Zhen suddenly changed his mind and asked everyone to stop. The reason was that he was afraid that the army would trample on the crops in Yuzhou. Before the new year, he had obtained large amounts of potato seeds from the Yangzhe village and Ministry of Revenue and planted them here. To protect these high-yielding crops, the army could not advance. This reason once again convinced Zhu Qizhen, and the army headed toward the Xian manor. Regarding this, Yang Qindong still maintained his silence. At this moment, even if he tried to persuade them, what could he do? With his current identity and position, his words would not be accepted by Wang Zhen and Ning Zong. If he rashly suggested it, it would only draw their disgust. As the Ming dynasty army headed toward the Xian manor, Yeshen, who had been following behind, also started to have thoughts. Yeshen's main force of cavalry was only around 30,000 people. Facing the Ming dynasty's main force of 500,000, he did not have confidence in winning in one battle. After following the Ming dynasty army for over 10 days and seeing the Ming dynasty army twist and turn around like a dumb bug, his heart slowly filled with confidence. It seemed like these 500,000 people were not strong and would not be able to take a single blow. As such, he gave the order to attack. Walla's elite cavalry split into two groups and attacked the Ming dynasty army. When Wang Zhen heard the news, he was very nervous and quickly retracted his army. He also sent Marquis Gongshan Wu Kezhong and Governor Wu Kaqin to lead troops to resist the battle. In the end, they were defeated. Wu Kezhong's troops acted as the Ming dynasty's rear guard and had more than 10,000 people, but they were still unable to take a single blow. After the defeat, he sent Duke Qing Zhuyong and Duke Yongshan Shueshi to lead 40,000 troops to Yaoa Ridge to fight with Yeshen. In the end, they were ambushed and completely wiped out. The troops that Zhu Yong led were the elites of the Ming dynasty, and they were mainly cavalry. After this force was wiped out, the Ming dynasty army had already lost the ability to fight with Yeshen. At the same time, their morale had also started to fall. Just like that, the day before the Ming dynasty army arrived at the Tuma castle, they had already suffered heavy losses. They lost around 50,000 men, and their actual military strength, not including the transport troops and civilian workers, was less than 200,000. Furthermore, they had lost their elite cavalry. When Zhu Yong led 30,000 men into Yeshen's ambush and did not return, Zhu Qizhen and Wang Zhen were so scared that they peed their pants and ran back. On the 13th day of the 8th month, the army entered the Tuma castle. When the army arrived at the Tuma castle, the sky was not dark and the sun had not set. At this moment, they were only 20 miles away from Huai Lai County, and they could rush there in a short time. The moment the army entered the county, the Walla cavalry would not be able to do anything. At this moment, it could be said that it was a matter of life and death. Wang Zhen was up to no good, and he ordered the army to stop advancing. It turned out that the 1,000-odd carriages that belonged to Wang Zhen had not arrived. These were the things that the border troops had given him along the way, and they were worth millions of silver. As the person in charge of this north expedition, the gifts from the local official Zhuang Xing were naturally accepted by Wang Zhen. The gifts from the officials along the way were too generous, which was why Wang Zhen gave up on the chance to enter Huailai city. Wang Zhen requested for everyone to wait for the carriages to arrive before they left. Hence, at the Tuma castle, Zhu Qizhen, hundreds of officials, and hundreds of thousands of troops waited foolishly for an entire night. When the sun rose, the 1,000-odd carriages still had not arrived. Wang Zhen could not wait any longer. In his heart, he knew that the carriages would not arrive, and at this moment, he wanted to leave. Unfortunately, even if he wanted to leave, it was already too late. With a night's time, the 30,000 Walla elite cavalry had split up and surrounded the Ming army. In the end, the hundreds of thousands of troops were surrounded by the 20,000 Walla cavalry in the Tuma castle, which had no water source. To say that 30,000 troops surrounded hundreds of thousands of troops was impossible under normal circumstances. However, after these few days, the army was like birds startled by the twang of a bow. Their morale was all gone, and they had lost half of their original combat strength. Wang Zhen was also frightened by the charging Walla cavalry. In his panic, he used the Tuma castle as the center to dig trenches and set up barriers to protect himself. Unfortunately, Wang Zhen did not know how to fight, and he did not even understand the geography of the place. The Tuma castle was located on high ground, and there was no water source, so it was not a place that could be defended. Hence, in the following days, the hundreds of thousands of Ming troops were surrounded by Yeshen for a full 2 days and 3 nights, and the lack of water became more and more serious. The Ming army dug 3 feet into the ground, but they could not find a single drop of water. Their morale was all gone, and their thoughts changed. 8th month, 15th day, Yeshen suddenly withdrew his troops. He said that he was not going to fight, and he even sent a messenger over to say that he wanted to negotiate. This was just him playing hard to get. Chapter 136. However, Wang Zhen believed it. Perhaps he was lying to himself. When he saw that Yeshen had retreated first, he immediately gave the order to go out and find a water source. With this order, the soldiers removed the encirclement, jumped out of the trench, and ran with all their might towards a small river 15 li away. The troops were instantly thrown into chaos. Looking from afar, one could only see a dense mass of black. However, after running for 3 to 4 li, tens of thousands of Walla elite cavalry suddenly appeared and charged into the chaos of the Ming Dynasty army. When the soldiers reached 10,000, there was no end. When the soldiers reached 100,000, there was no end. The Walla army besieged the Ming Dynasty army from all sides. The cavalry rushed in and waved their swords to kill the Ming Dynasty army. The Ming Dynasty army suffered heavy casualties. Wherever the cavalry swords passed, heads flew high into the air. At the same time, blood splattered everywhere. At the same time, they shouted, "Those who throw swords will not be killed." In times of crisis, we could see the shamelessness of the Ming Dynasty officials. The Walla army's slogan was, "Those who throw swords will not be killed." As long as they threw away their armor and weapons, it was fine. However, in order to save their lives, these officials actually took off everything and trampled on each other naked. The number of people trampled to death by their own people was more than the number of people killed by the Walla army. At that time, the Walla army was already not in formation and did not have the heart to kill the enemy. This was because they were busy getting rich, specifically picking up gold, silver, jewels and valuables, to rob. At that time, if there were 1 or 2 strong generals who stood up and shouted, they might have been able to reverse the situation. During the 3 Kingdoms period, Cao Cao did this. Qin Xiong also did this under Zhang Shutua and Li Mi. Unfortunately, Wang Zhen was not Cao Cao. The Ming Dynasty generals did not have Qin Xiong or Qin Shubao. Everyone was busy taking off their clothes to save their lives. After taking off their clothes, the miserable state they were in became the laughingstock of history. Looking at Ingzong, this fellow, he did not even dismount from his horse. Instead, under the tight protection of the embroidered uniform guards, he broke out of the encirclement and escaped. It was a pity that everyone was busy taking off their clothes at that time, so there was no one to support him. The embroidered uniform guard failed to break through the encirclement, and in the end, Zhu Qizhen became a lone boat on the sea, drifting under the protection of General Fan Zhong. If not for Yang Qindong's appearance, he would have been like a little chick, dragged to the north by the Walla army. Ever since he had left the capital, Yang Qindong had acted like a spectator, observing everything that was happening around him. The Ming Dynasty army suffered defeat after defeat, and wrong orders were given out by Wang Zhen. Zhu Qizhen was like a puppet, only knowing how to nod his head in agreement and unable to debate. Yang Qindong looked on coldly from the side. This was a close understanding of ancient warfare, as well as a close observation of the Ming Dynasty's military power. Even if some of the orders were wrong and were opposed by the officials, Zhu Qizhen agreed and Wang Zhen carried them out. Even if Yang Qindong wanted to change anything, he could not do it. He could only watch as the army was surrounded and broken down, and in the end, the entire battle was a complete failure. In this, Yang Qindong was limited in what he could do. In the face of Wang Zhen, who had actual military power over hundreds of thousands of soldiers, unless he could hold Wang Zhen hostage, it was impossible for him to have any control over the war. Everything continued until the balance of the war was completely one-sided. The final moment had finally arrived. The Battle of Tumu could be considered a farce. There was no cavalry charging, no generals bravely killing the enemy, no decisive battle between large armies, and no spectacular sight of the firearms of the three major battalions opening fire on all fronts. The timing of Walla's attack was when the Ming Dynasty's camp loosened up and moved to fetch water. Whether they fell for Yeshin's trick or the Ming Dynasty took the initiative to fetch water, it was no longer important. Young master, it's a mess, it's all a mess. Hu Mang's eyes were filled with vigilance as he scanned his surroundings. The Type 54 gun hidden under his sleeves was already loaded and the safety was off. Whenever he discovered anyone trying to approach or threaten the young master, he would not hesitate to open fire and kill the enemy. Sigh. A sigh came from Yang Qindong's mouth. This sigh was for the hundreds of thousands of soldiers of the Ming Dynasty. This sigh was for the decline of the Ming Dynasty. This sigh was also for the sake of ending the chaos in front of him. Pass down the order, follow the first set of plans. Yang Qindong's eyes were still cold, but if one looked carefully, there was a trace of liveliness and hope. After the order was given, the hundreds of people who had been wandering around began to move. Compared to the people around them who were in a complete mess and were even undressing, they were dressed in good clothes and moved quickly, each according to the previous plan. Wang Zhen. This eunuch, who only knew how to seize power and money, was like a headless fly at this moment. His eyes were constantly looking up and down, looking for a way to survive. For him, the defeat of the army was not terrible. As long as he could survive, everything would be fine. It would not be long before he could reorganize a new army and go to the battlefield. Of course, he might have the ability to do so, but whether or not he had the courage was another matter. His 4 eyes were still blinking rapidly when suddenly, someone flashed past his side. In a chaotic army, this kind of scene was too common. The soldiers did not know their generals, and the generals did not know their soldiers. They were completely like headless flies running around. However, just as a figure flashed past him, Wang Zhen felt a sharp pain in his neck. Instinctively, he stretched out his hand to touch it. Blood spurted out uncontrollably into his hand, and the hot sensation caused his eyes to widen rapidly. Soon after, he started to scream. Save me, someone killed me. Wang Zhen was still conscious at this moment. He knew that at this moment, someone had done something to him. But in a chaotic battlefield, death was a very common thing. Even if he was the head eunuch of the ceremony directorate, even if he was the most favored by Emperor Ing, no one was paying attention to him at this moment. One of his hands covered his neck that had been cut, as if he wanted to block the bleeding wound. The other hand was raised high and constantly waved, as if he wanted to use this to attract people's attention. He maintained this posture for 1 second, 2 seconds, 3 seconds. After about 7 to 8 breaths of time, he fell to his knees with a plop. Then, his eyes turned gray, and his face showed an extremely strong expression of unwillingness. He was unwilling. He clearly had great power, so why did he fall to the ground? He was unwilling. The emperor had trusted him so much, and there was still a great future waiting for him. He was unwilling to accept the fact that he had died in such a dubious manner. Even when he died, he did not even know who had killed him. He was unwilling, but he was indeed dead. Wang Zhen was dead. Dying in a chaotic battlefield, no one would pay attention to him. Even if someone saw him, they would probably want to step on him to vent their anger. Compared to Wang Zhen, who died at the hands of Leng Feng, Minister of Revenue Wang Zhua and Minister of War Kuang Yi were saved by Leng Feng. Tiger's Man and Xiao Feng respectively saved the two ministers and rushed to Yang Chendong's side. In comparison, Kuang Ye's clothes were not bad, and his appearance was not bad. No matter what, he was still the Minister of War, so he should have some integrity. However, the buttons on his shirt that he remembered wrongly showed that when Walla's army said, "Remove your armor and don't kill those who throw blades," he was also flustered. Speaking of which, who was not afraid of death? When faced with death, it was not wrong for a person to react in any way. At least, it could not be said to be wrong, because it often replaced a person's instinct and nature. Kuang Yi only remembered a few buttons wrongly. Compared to Wang Zhua, he was indeed much better. This was because our Minister of Revenue had already taken off his robes and was only wearing underwear. Moreover, it was wrinkled and didn't fit him at all. At a glance, one could tell that it was the kind of clothes that he had snatched from somewhere and put on temporarily. Yang Chendong was not surprised at all by Wang Zhua's reaction. As a scholar, he should have integrity. However, in a chaotic battlefield, he would be affected by others and completely lose his mind. It was reasonable for him to do things that he would not have dared to do before. When the two ministers were brought in front of Yang Chendong, their faces naturally turned red. They felt ashamed of their current behavior, but this feeling quickly disappeared and was replaced by curiosity. They were curious as to why in such a chaotic situation, this crown prince who was only a 5th-rank official did not panic. Not only that, there were 10 to 20 strong men standing beside him. Compared to the panic of the other soldiers, these people stood up straight and their expressions were extremely serious. Their eyes were like poles as they scanned the surroundings. Their vigilance was clearly telling others not to casually walk into this place. Otherwise, the consequences would be very serious. The two ministers were surprised and many questions popped up in their minds. Then, another group of people came from afar. Their approach made the two of them nervous again. "Don't worry, they are on the same side." Noticing the two ministers' reaction, Yang Chendong said softly. This was like the warm sunlight in the winter, instantly relaxing their minds. The people who came from afar were the Leng Feng of the Yang clan's new army. Under their protection, the Right Assistant Minister Ding Xian of the Ministry of Justice, the Right Assistant Minister Wang Yonghe of the Ministry of Works, the Left Assistant Minister Yang Shan of the Ministry of Rights, the Right Assistant Minister Deng Li of the Imperial Censorate, the Assistant Minister Huang Yangjing of the Taichung Temple, the Assistant Minister Lu Rong of the Taichung Temple, and the Assistant Minister Ling Zhu of the Shangbao Temple were brought in front of Yang Chendong. Seeing the 7 people walking over, Yang Chendong's gaze carried a trace of doubt as he asked the Leng Feng, "Just these?" "It's just that some of them are still in good condition. The others have trampled on each other to death. Some of them have already been stripped clean, and it's hard to tell who is who." The platoon leader of the Leng Feng platoon stood at attention and said. Chapter 137. Well, my ability is limited. Being able to save these people is already very good. Let's go. Everyone, pack up and let's go find the emperor. Yang Chendong's chin gently moved. Although the first plan was to save 30 officials or marquis, the battlefield was originally ever-changing. No one could take care of everything. It was not easy to save a total of 9 people. At this time, the 9 Darren all noticed that something was wrong with Yang Chendong. This horse washer seemed to be calmer than anyone else. He even seemed to have a small number of elite armed forces with good fighting strength. But to be able to reach this position, which one of them was not a shrewd person? At this time, no one would open their mouth to ask why. If they were unhappy, the other party would just casually abandon them. Other than waiting for death, they did not know what to do. No one raised an objection. Yang Qindong led everyone to the place where the emperor was. Originally, everyone was with the emperor, but when the war started, the whole situation became chaotic. Fortunately, Yang Qindong had already arranged for people to keep an eye on the emperor's every move. As someone who had foreseen all of this would happen, how could he abandon Zhu Qizhen, this important big shot, at such a critical time? Compared to the chaos on the battlefield, where people were stripping off their armor and running away without resisting, the place where Zhu Qizhen was standing was very tragic. The performance of Huban and the accompanying little eunuchs was probably the only bright spot in the whole change of the Tuma castle. They were shot into hedgehogs by the tiles, but they still fought to the death without retreating. Their purpose was to protect Emperor Zhu Qizhen, who was trembling in fear and had yellow water dripping from his trousers. Yes, at this time, Zhu Qizhen had completely lost the majesty of the emperor. His golden armor had long been thrown away. At this time, he was wearing an inner robe and was curled up in a corner, trembling. Later history books had recorded that even when Zhu Qizhen was captured by Walla's army, he was so calm, so brave, and even had a face of justice. He even dared to scold the enemy. But in fact, that was not the case. This was just a trick that Emperor Yingzong used to beautify himself after he became the emperor again. Only Yang Ming's, the orthodox northern hunting story, praised Zhu Qizhen as a flower. In fact, the records in Lin Rong records and Abutai records were completely different. Just like Lu Dingji's record of negation of Taishang, we can see three things from the Tuma Castle incident. First, Wang Zhen was indeed the culprit behind the Tuma Castle incident. Second, Zhu Qizhen was not calm at all. Third, the officials were very shameless, and the imperial guards, Huban, were very loyal. When Yang Qindong and the 9 ministers arrived, they saw a group of Walla cavalry fighting against Hu Ben and the eunuchs. However, relatively speaking, the ones who were killed were the little eunuchs. By the time he arrived with everyone, all the eunuchs were dead, and not a single one was left. Only the general of the guards, Fan Zhong, and a dozen or so Hu Ben, who were seriously injured, were still resisting with all their might. Even though they were still far away, everyone could see that even their emperor would be captured by the Walla cavalry if they stayed any longer. The 9 ministers and all the new soldiers of the Yang family all looked at Yang Qindong. At this moment, he had undoubtedly become the backbone of everyone. Everyone's hopes were placed on him. Charge over, open a bloody path. Anyone who resists, kill. His face was indifferent, and his words fell from his mouth. If someone did not know, they would think that he was a general who had the overall situation under control. In fact, they only had 100 people, but the Walla cavalry had at least 300 people. The 9 ministers looked at Yang Qindong with suspicious eyes. They really could not understand what this horse-washing master was relying on at this moment. In contrast, the 100 soldiers were eager to give it a try. Speaking of which, these people had all been baptized by war. Some had participated in the war of Deng Maoqi's uprising, and also participated in the Battle of Ryukyu Island. Speaking of which, if these people did not have outstanding strength and outstanding performance, they would not have become soldiers of the 1st Company of the 1st Battalion. Most of the time, the 1st Battalion represented the strongest. But no matter how many battles they had participated in, how many victories they had won, it could not compare to this time. This was in front of the 6th young master. Perhaps many of the soldiers would not have such an opportunity in their lives. But now, the opportunity was in front of them. Who would not want to perform well? At this time, the role of the commander of the 1st Battalion, Xiao Feng, suddenly appeared. As an officer and the current leader of the army, after hearing Yang Qindong's order, he said without the slightest hesitation, the 1st platoon is responsible for the left wing, the 2nd platoon is responsible for the right wing, the 3rd platoon is responsible for the 8th platoon, the 9th platoon is responsible for the safety of everyone, and the 10th platoon is responsible for the rear. After the order was given, the 100 soldiers of the 1st battalion quickly moved. Some went to the left, some went to the right, and some rushed to the front of Yang Qindong and the others. In less than 10 breaths, everyone was in position. Their speed and agility opened the eyes of the Minister of War, Kuang Yi, who was in the crowd. He had lived for decades, and most of the time, he was in communication with the branch. He could not be more clear about the execution and mobility of the great Ming Dynasty's army. It was precisely because of this that he could see the horror of this army that jumped out of nowhere. Not to mention other things, just their mobility alone was inferior to the great Ming Dynasty's army that he had seen. Even the elite army when Emperor Cheng was still alive would not have such a performance. They were able to be orderly in times of danger without the slightest trace of disorder. While the ministers were dazzled, the 1st Battalion of the 1st Battalion completed the distribution of the battle formation. Then, after Xiao Feng said the word, advance, the army began to attack forward. Step by step, they were very steady. The eyes of the 100 soldiers also lit up, and they were full of courage. Before everyone could see what was going on, a black firearm that no one had seen before appeared in the hands of the soldiers of the 1st Battalion of the 1st Battalion. As soon as the firearm was taken out, these people seemed to have become one with it, giving people the feeling that this thing originally existed. The 100 soldiers moved forward in an orderly pace, narrowing the distance between them and the emperor step by step. The sudden appearance of this army naturally attracted the attention of the Walla cavalry not far away. The general who was in charge of commanding the battle saw that the great Ming Dynasty's army was in chaos. Many of them were trampling on each other, many of them were running away, and some of them were surrendering. However, there was still an army that took the initiative to approach them. He was instantly infuriated. Still riding on the strong horse, the general did not put the 100 or so soldiers in front of him in his eyes. It was just a charge that could completely defeat them, so it did not arouse his interest. You, go and kill those reckless people for me. Don't let them live, kill them all. General Walla felt that his dignity had been provoked. He must give these people a heavy blow and let others who still dared to resist see the consequences of disobeying them. Kill. 50 to 60 Vala cavalrymen, dressed in the clothes of the Vala clan, were yelling and shouting as they charged towards Yang Qindong. In the eyes of the cavalry, as they charged, they would soon wipe out all the enemies like a gust of wind sweeping away fallen leaves. Although the 1st Battalion of the 1st Battalion of the 1st Battalion of the Great Ming Dynasty held a black firearm in their hands, they had seen such a battle formation before. The 3 firearm battalions of the Great Ming Dynasty's army, which had a total of 15,000 people, did not pose a threat to them. Didn't they all throw away their weapons and armor when the army charged? Be careful, the Walla cavalry is very brave and fierce. When the ministers saw the cavalry charging toward them, their bodies trembled and their voices trembled slightly. Compared to the ministers' fearful expressions, the 100 or so soldiers of the 1st Battalion of the 1st Battalion of the 1st Battalion of the Great Ming Dynasty did not take their eyes off the enemy. They all raised the firearms in their hands and according to their usual training, they stood in formation and aimed at the corresponding cavalry. At this moment, all the soldiers of the 1st Battalion of the 1st Battalion adjusted the rhythm of their breathing and waited for Xiao Feng's order to shoot. 200 steps, 150 steps, 100 steps. As the commander, Xiao Feng calmly looked at everything in front of him. He did not show any abnormal reaction because of the charge of the enemy cavalry. When he estimated that the enemy was 100 steps away, he immediately opened his mouth and spat out 2 words, shoot. His voice was an order. Immediately, dozens of crisp gunshots rang out. The bullets whizzed out of the barrels, as if they were carrying a trace of fire as they rushed forward. Even the moment the gunshots rang out, they sounded so orderly as if there was only one person firing from the beginning to the end. These were the soldiers of the 1st Battalion of the 1st Battalion, the strongest elites that Yang Qindong had spent a lot of effort to train. Under the high-intensity training and layers of tests, each and every one of the soldiers of the 1st Battalion of the 1st Battalion of the 1st Battalion of the 1st Battalion of the Great Ming Dynasty. When the gunshots rang out, the Walla cavalry charging toward them were like small trees that were swept up by a strong wind and fell to the ground one by one. At this moment, all of the 50 to 60 men fell off their horses. Only 56 horses that had lost their owners ran toward them. Try to capture as many war horses as possible for the lords to use. Yang Qindong looked at the results of the first round of shooting and nodded with satisfaction. His expression also relaxed a lot. Before seeing a real battle, even though Yang Qindong was extremely confident in his training, he still lacked confidence. Most of the time, training included drills and real battle were two different things. Now, after a wave of bullets, it was effective. All the enemies were hit and killed, and no one was caught. This result was very satisfying and very gratifying. Chapter 138. After the order was given, Ling Feng grabbed the Vala horses one by one and brought them before the 9 ministers. What they received in return was a look of disbelief. Among the ministers, Kuang Ye's eyes were as wide as bells. What kind of firearm is this? How can it shoot so far and so accurately? Can you show it to me? Sorry, I can't. He watched as Kuang Ye's hand unconsciously reached for the gun in the hand of Ling Feng, who had delivered the horse to him. Kuang Ye moved his body slightly and dodged the gun. Then, he looked at Ling Feng with a cold and murderous gaze. It was this look that made Kuang Ye's body tremble uncontrollably. At this moment, he felt that he was so close to the god of death. Sorry, Minister Feng, they are mercenaries. They only took my money to do something. They won't listen to anyone and won't allow anyone to touch the weapons in their hands. If you insist on doing so, there's only one outcome, and that's becoming a dead man. I can't protect you on this point. Yang Qindong saw Kuang Ye's awkwardness. He knew that if he didn't make things clear, everyone would be suspicious. Since that was the case, he might as well make things clear and dispel these people's suspicions. As soon as this was said, the officials who were originally curious withdrew their gazes and looked down, as if they did not care about what was going on outside. If they touched it, they would die. The price of curiosity was too high. It was so high that they couldn't bear it. Even Minister Kuang Ye became a lot more honest at this time and even apologized. This old man was reckless just now, it's my fault. It's fine. The ignorant are innocent. Just don't do it. Yang Qindong smiled and turned to Xiao Feng. Our emperor hasn't been rescued and we haven't achieved our goal. We'll have to trouble you. Since they were collaborators, he had to be careful with his words. Xiao Feng, who was somewhat uncomfortable with Yang Qindong's attitude and tone of discussion, hurriedly said, Okay, since we've taken 6th young master's money, of course we'll do it well. Everyone, listen up. Keep moving forward. A few hundred steps away, General Wallace sat on his horse in a daze. Unknowingly, he already had the urge to pee, and it was almost flowing out uncontrollably. 50 to 60 cavalrymen were wiped out in the blink of an eye. Not a single one of them was able to get within 90 paces. They all died. One had to know that all of them had died without a single survivor. This had never happened before in previous battles. No one had even thought that such a situation would occur. But now, the truth had appeared. Again, let's go together and kill all of them. General Walla was angry. He didn't know that the emperor of the Great Ming Dynasty was already close at hand. He only needed 2 or 3 more charges to capture him alive. He was frightened by Yang Qindong's team. He felt that if he didn't deal with these people, it would be like a fishbone stuck in his throat, and he wouldn't feel safe at all. Many of the remaining 200 or so Walla cavalry also saw this scene. At first, they were indeed shocked, but with the general's shout, the heroic spirit in their hearts was stimulated. Each of them stared at the more than 100 people with covetous eyes, and then the cavalry charged. More than 200 cavalrymen against more than 100 people, and all of them were infantrymen. Moreover, there were no obstacles on the plains. No matter how one looked at it, there was no possibility of failure. Once the speed of the horses increased, the cavalry swords in their hands would only need to lightly slash and a big head would fly. Ah! All kinds of screams were heard, and the Walla cavalry's charge began. With the help of the speed of the horses, the distance between the two sides was quickly shortened. Be careful, be careful. Kuang Yi, Wang Zhua, and the other important officials were staring at the scene in front of them. Although they were already sitting on their horses, they still felt their bodies trembling. This was because they really didn't know how these mercenaries, as mentioned by Yang Chendong, would deal with more than 2 times the number of soldiers. This was naturally because they didn't understand these firearms. Their past experience told them that the power of firearms was indeed not small, but their weakness was also quite obvious. That was, after firing a shot, they had to reload. In this way, when facing more than 2 times the number of enemies, the firearms soldiers didn't have the slightest advantage. Raise your guns, ready, to fire. Different from the previous time, this time, Xiao Feng also raised the 95 style in his hand. The increase in the number of enemies made him want to join in the battle. However, this action of his had indeed caused the other Lang Feng members to show dissatisfaction. It was just more than 2 times the number of enemies, and they really didn't care about it. The battalion commander clearly wanted to satisfy his craving. Naturally, no one could guess the thoughts of the Lang Feng. Just when everyone thought that the battle was going to end badly, gunshots rang out. First, it was a volley of shots, and almost half of the enemy's troops were eliminated. Then, the gunshots were no longer as orderly as before, but it only gave the impression that there were a few more gunshots. Next, on the entire battlefield, only General Walla was escaping on his horse. At the most crucial moment, the general became afraid. He relied on his superb horsemanship to hide his body on the horse, and only then did he manage to dodge the shot. However, in front of the most elite Lang Feng, since you were already identified as a target, how could you escape? Even if you managed to dodge the first shot, you wouldn't be able to dodge the second. Xiao Feng raised his gun, and after his breathing calmed down, he moved his right index finger. After a crisp paw sound, the healthy horse fell to the ground. Once the healthy horse fell, General Walla naturally fell off the horse, then quickly got up and continued to run. However, after another gunshot, the body that was moving forward suddenly fell to the ground, and there was no more movement from it. The second shot was still fired by Xiao Feng. He wasn't arrogant enough to think that he could kill the target with one shot, so he only shot the horse to prepare himself for the next shot. 2 consecutive shots from the same gun finally killed General Walla, but at the same time, it opened Kuang Ye's eyes. Originally, he could tell that this gun was different from the guns in the Great Ming Dynasty, but he never expected that this gun could fire continuously, and from such a long distance with such accuracy. This scene was tantamount to giving him a solid lesson. Although he was not out of danger yet, at this time, he was already considering whether he could buy such firearms from the army. If that was the case, why would the Great Ming Dynasty be afraid of a strong enemy? Xiao Feng's performance won Yang Chendong's applause. Not bad. Although it was only 2 words, it was enough to make Xiao Feng's face glow. He was even happier than if he had received a military medal. This was the 6th young master's praise. If Leng Song and Gao Xiong knew about it, they would probably be envious. Xiao Feng, who was satisfied, felt even more motivated. He immediately ordered, "Everyone, listen to my orders. Search and move forward. If you find any danger, you don't have to report it. Deal with it yourself." This was equivalent to handing the right to fire to the individual. The 100 Lang Feng members immediately became excited. Their eyes kept searching for the enemy who might not be completely dead yet. Perhaps it was because their previous shooting skills were too accurate, but along the way, they didn't find a single enemy that was not dead. This made the soldiers feel like they were not satisfied. On the contrary, Kuang Yi, Wang Zhua, and the other important officials who followed them all the way breathed a sigh of relief in their hearts. With such a powerful mercenary group accompanying them, their safety should be much more guaranteed. After more than 300 steps, Zhu Qizhen finally took off his armor and appeared in everyone's line of sight in a yellow robe. Compared to his usual high and mighty appearance, at this moment, his eyes were filled with fear. His clothes were disheveled, and there was even a small bruise on his face. The bruise was probably caused by falling to the ground. In short, he was currently in a sorry state. When he saw Yang Chendong and the others, his originally lifeless eyes immediately became filled with a strong desire for life. Beloved official Yang, we are here. We are here. Check the injuries of the others and protect His Majesty. Yang Chendong also saw Zhu Qizhen. He then ran over to Zhu Qizhen's side, pretending to be terrified. Finally, he could grab Yang Chendong's hand. Zhu Qizhen said with a panicked expression, "Sir, you have misled me. You have misled me." At this moment, Zhu Qizhen still didn't forget to find a scapegoat for this great defeat. From this, it could be seen that no one who could become an emperor was simple. Yes, eunuch Wang messed up the battle and caused a great defeat. He is guilty. However, he did it out of kindness. He just isn't good at leading troops. Yang Chendong knew how Zhu Qizhen felt about Wang Zhen. In history, this person was first captured and then sent back by Walla. He only regained the throne a few years later. However, once he took the throne, he didn't forget to build a colorful clay statue for Wang Zhen. He even built a monument for him. Just from this point alone, it could be seen how much Zhu Qizhen doted on Wang Zhen. He didn't believe that Zhu Qizhen would hate Wang Zhen just because of this great defeat. Furthermore, outsiders knew that he and Wang Zhen were working together. If he said anything overboard now, it would give people the impression that he was burning the bridge after crossing the river. Anyway, he had already been killed by Leng Feng. What did it matter if he said something nice? When Yang Chendong said this, Zhu Qizhen looked at him with admiration. He then said, "Beloved official Yang, you should send someone to see if you can find Sir. Perhaps he is fighting with the enemy somewhere." Chapter 139. Oh, okay. Yang Chendong nodded his head in agreement when he saw that it was true. This action was strongly opposed by Kuang Yi, Wang Zhua, and the others. "That won't do, Your Majesty. We don't have many soldiers by our side right now. If we send more people out and encounter the Walla cavalry, I'm afraid it will be disastrous. Your Majesty, please reconsider." If Wang Zhen was here, they wouldn't dare to say this. However, they knew that he wasn't here and that he was most likely dead. Even if it was for their own safety, they could say anything. That's right, that's right. We only have 100 mercenaries by our side. If we ask them for help, it will definitely divide our strength. If we encounter another enemy, we won't even know if we're dead or alive. Yang Chendong naturally wouldn't send Leng Feng to search for Wang Zhen. Wang Zhen was already dead. What was the point of searching for him? Thus, he pretended to be in a difficult position. When he mentioned that searching for Wang Zhen would divide their strength and put them in danger, Zhu Qizhen's desire to search for Wang Zhen wasn't as strong. After all, no matter how good their relationship was, if there was a possibility of losing their lives, they would have to think twice. Sigh, all right. I believe that Sir will be blessed by the heavens. He should be fine. Zhu Qizhen was forced to give up on searching for Wang Zhen. However, he then looked at Yang Chendong and said, "Beloved official Yang, who are these people? How did they have the strength to kill so many Walla cavalry and come to my side? Your Majesty, please forgive this subject for his innocence." Yang Chendong knew that this was an excellent opportunity to reveal the identities of Xiao Feng and the others. Of course, he wouldn't miss it. Thus, he pretended to be guilty as he spoke. "Sigh, beloved official Yang, why are you doing this? You saved me. This is a great merit. How can I blame you?" Zhu Qizhen grabbed Yang Chendong and didn't let him kneel down. Instead, he spoke with an excited expression. It had to be said that Zhu Qizhen had a way of grasping people's hearts. Just like those words just now, anyone who heard it would be inexplicably grateful, and even have the thought of going through water and treading on fire to repay the emperor's kindness. But who was Yang Chendong? In the future, being a monarch was just a status symbol to him. It was absolutely impossible for him to swear loyalty because of this. At the very least, it was not something that an incapable ruler like Zhu Qizhen could do. In his heart, he didn't take Zhu Qizhen's words to heart, but on the surface, he pretended to be extremely touched and said, "How could this subject save the emperor? It's clear that the emperor is blessed by the heavens, which led this subject to rush over." Zhu Qizhen's face lit up with joy after hearing those words. His fearful expression seemed to have relaxed quite a bit. "Your Majesty, the reason why I said I was guilty was because I was afraid of death. That's why I spent a lot of money to hire these foreign mercenaries. They only recognize money and not people. In their eyes, there is no distinction between country and region. They will work for whoever can pay them. Your Majesty also knows that this subject doesn't lack money. I did it for the sake of my own safety. But I didn't report it to Your Majesty in advance, which is also a crime." There was a dignified opportunity to say the identity of Xiao Feng and the others to Zhu Qizhen. As long as he knew, this matter would be legalized. Sure enough, when Zhu Qizhen heard this, he nodded with an understanding look. "Good, beloved official Yang is always prepared for a rainy day. But I just don't know how much they are so powerful." Zhu Qizhen wasn't the only one who thought this way. The other ministers were also very curious. After seeing the power of this mercenary army, they really wanted to know how much it was. In fact, the one who was most concerned about it was Zhu Qizhen. Although he didn't see it personally, to be able to come in front of him in the midst of the chaos, they must have some ability. Then if everyone could hire such a powerful army, wouldn't it mean that they had the capital to rebel? How could he not pay attention to it? Feeling everyone's gaze on him, Yang Qindong smiled and said, "Your Majesty. Coincidentally, they weren't hired by me in the beginning. They were barbarians from overseas who did business with me. This time, they were in charge of delivering goods to the skies beyond trading company. When I met them, the army was about to go to war. I discussed it with them and asked them to protect me for 10,000 taels per person. If it weren't for this coincidence, I'm afraid that they wouldn't be interested in such a small amount of money. 10,000 taels per person, 100 people would be 1,000,000 taels." After hearing this, Kuang Yi and Wang Zhua couldn't help but suck in a breath of cold air. Especially Wang Zhua. As the Minister of Revenue, he had a clear understanding of the great Ming Dynasty's money. The value of the money that passed through his hands every year was very large. However, even he was shocked when he heard the price, not to mention the other important ministers. This answer also shocked Zhu Qizhen so much that he broke out in a cold sweat. 1,000,000 taels of silver just to protect him? This Yang Qindong was really too rich. Of course, he was probably the only person in the entire court who could afford such a price. After all, whether it was the immortal abode or the skies beyond trading company, large amounts of money flowed in every day. This answer also allowed Zhu Qizhen to breathe a sigh of relief. The higher the price of the mercenary army, the more relieved he would be. It also showed that not everyone had the ability to hire this army and achieve great things to threaten him. While they were talking, Tiger's Mane walked up to Yang Qindong. "Young master, apart from General Fan Zhong's injuries, the rest of the Tiger's Mane didn't continue, but his continuous shaking of his head explained everything." When Yang Qindong heard this, he didn't make any decisions. Instead, he looked at Zhu Qizhen with an expression that said, "You're the emperor, so you should make the decisions. Forget it, just let them be. When we return to the palace, we will reward their families greatly. As for what happens next, beloved Minister Yang, and my other beloved ministers, what do you all think?" Zhu Qizhen was very satisfied with Yang Qindong's attitude, but he really didn't have any ideas right now. After the army's defeat, his mind was already in a mess. Although he said he was asking the ministers, everyone's eyes were actually on Yang Qindong. It was clear that they had long since run out of ideas. In a situation where they were surrounded by enemies, there seemed to be no path out that was safe. Since he was the one who came up with the idea, Yang Qindong didn't hold back. He knew that the longer they stayed here, the greater the danger they would be in. Previously, because all of the Walla cavalry had been wiped out, the news didn't spread. But once the Walla army found out about their tracks, once the army pressed on, with only 100 people, there was still danger. Alright, since the Emperor has given this important task to this subject will give his own suggestion. Our current position is naturally the closest to Huai Lai County, but that place is also the most dangerous. The Walla will definitely be on guard against us and will definitely arrange a large number of troops there. Then we might as well do the opposite and go to Yuzhou. Yang Qindong acted as if he had a card up his sleeve. In reality, this was also his plan from the beginning. That's right, catch them off guard and attack them when they least expect it. The art of war says that what is false and what is true and what is false. I'm sure no one will think that we will go to Yuzhou. After hearing Yang Qindong's suggestion, Minister of War Kuang Yi immediately supported it. Yang Qindong and Kuang Yi, who understood the art of war, both had the same idea. Zhu Qizhen's heart was set. Alright, then we will go to Yuzhou. After saying that, he got up and prepared to leave. But he was stopped by Yang Qindong. What is the meaning of this, Minister Yang? Zhu Qizhen's expression changed greatly. He was afraid that this person would have evil intentions towards him. If that was the case, then with only the injured General Fan Zhong, he was afraid that he wouldn't be able to protect himself. Yang Qindong, what are you doing? Fan Zhong stepped forward with his hammer in hand, in a questioning manner. But before he could get close, Tiger's Mane, Beta Persei and Yang Wu had already surrounded him from 3 directions. It was guaranteed that if he took another step forward, his blood would splatter 5 feet and he would fall to the ground and die. The situation suddenly became tense. Yang Qindong hurriedly gave Tiger's Mane and the others a look to retreat, then half knelt in front of Zhu Qizhen. Your Majesty, this subject doesn't have any other intentions. It's just that if we are going to escape, Your Majesty must change your clothes. Change my clothes? Why? Zhu Qizhen was puzzled. Your Majesty, wearing a yellow robe will easily attract other people's attention. It will also easily attract the Walla cavalry's pursuit. Yang Qindong cursed the other party's pig head in his heart, but on the surface, he looked like he was advising him. Oh. At this moment, Zhu Qizhen came to his senses and nodded. That's right. Beloved official Yang is right. Since that's the case, we will take off the yellow robe. Yes, Your Majesty not only has to take off the robe, but also put it on someone else to confuse the enemy's attention. Yang Qindong's words shocked Kuang Yi and the other officials, causing them to become nervous. They first looked at each other, then slowly lowered their heads. These people's reactions fell into the eyes of Yang Qindong and Zhu Qizhen, and the latter was naturally unhappy. The former lowered his head and smiled, but when he looked up, he had already returned to his serious state. Your Majesty can put the yellow robe on Hu Ben, who died with a similar figure to you, to create a false image and use it to confuse the enemy. Hearing that they were going to let the dead wear clothes, Kuang Yi and the others raised their heads one by one, and their expressions returned to normal. Zhu Qizhen suddenly understood and said, That's right. Beloved official Yang is right. This way, the Walla army will think that we have already ascended to heaven. This way, no one will pursue us. Chapter 140. Your Majesty is wise. Yang Qindong and several other important officials all knelt on the ground with respectful expressions. Ha ha ha, officials, please rise. I will take off my clothes now. Zhu Qizhen seemed to have found the feeling of being an emperor again. With a laugh, he took off his yellow robe. Soon, Hu Ben, whose body was similar to Zhu Qizhen's, was brought in front of everyone. More importantly, his face had been cut several times. Everyone worked together and put the yellow robe on the body of the dead. Then, they identified the direction of Yuzhou and hurried over. About 2 hours after they left, a group of about 500 Walla cavalry rushed over. Among them was a eunuch wearing a eunuch uniform. This person was Shi Ning, and could be considered an important eunuch in the group. Shi Ning followed the army out. When the chaos broke out, he was unfortunately caught by the Walla cavalry. Just as they were about to cut him to death, he shouted out his identity and said that he could help the Walla army find Mingyingzong. In this way, the Ming dynasty would be within their reach. Xi Ning's words were too enticing. When the Walla general heard it, he couldn't help but be moved. Thus, he didn't kill him. Instead, he brought him to search for news of Zhu Qizhen. This group of people was led by the Walla king, and Xi Ning was among them. When they arrived at the battlefield, the bright yellow robe was immediately noticed by everyone. Xi Ning got off his horse and walked over to the corpse that was already unrecognizable. He carefully searched it and found Zhu Qizhen's jade pendant. He immediately said with joy, "General, this is the Ming dynasty emperor, but he is already dead." Dead? Sigh. Hearing that Zhu Qizhen was dead, a trace of hatred appeared on the Walla king's face. It was clear that a dead person had no effect on him. Noticing the disappointment on the competition king's face, Xi Ning, who was afraid that he would lose his life, rolled his eyes and said, "General, although the Ming dynasty emperor is already dead, we still have the jade pendant in our hands. We can still do something. I presume that this chaotic news will cause the Ming army to panic, and if we can use this chance, we might be able to attack the capital. Sir is very familiar with that place, with its countless treasures and beauties." Speaking of the prosperity of the capital, as a former emissary, how could the periodical king not know of it? Immediately, his expression changed from worry to joy as he said, "Good, good. Let's go. Follow me to see the leader. We are preparing to attack the capital of the great Ming dynasty." Ha ha ha. Zhu Qizhen had intentionally left the waist pendant behind, saying that it was to make it more realistic. He didn't expect that it would come in handy and become an item to identify his identity. At this time, Great Mingyingzong, who had changed into a bright tiger robe, was currently heading towards Shangxi Yuzhou with Yang Chendong and his group. Even if they didn't choose to walk to the front, they still encountered two of Walla's cavalry units. Each side had 100 cavalrymen, but when they met the cold front, they were like live targets. Before they could see clearly what kind of formation was on the other side and who was on the other side, they were all killed from afar. This was also the first time Zhu Qizhen saw the power of the cold front at such a close distance. For a moment, his heart was filled with fear. But when he thought that they were now being used by him, he couldn't help but feel relieved. Now that they had more healthy horses and more food from the bodies of the Walla cavalry, everyone began to speed up after eating and drinking to their heart's content. Regardless of whether it was day or night, they headed straight for Yuzhou. Xi Ning was brought to his elder brother, Yes Hen, who was also the leader of the Walla, by the periodical king. Yes Hen was tall and sturdy, and there was a sense of superiority in his eyes. His eyes were deep and sharp, and when he looked at Xi Ning, he was so scared that his heart jumped. "You said that this belongs to your Ming emperor?" Yes Hen asked casually as he played with the seemingly expensive waist pendant in his hand. Yes, Lord Chief, this belongs to our Ming emperor. He has already been killed by the brave Walla cavalry." Xi Ning knelt on the ground like a servant. After saying this, he was afraid that the other party wouldn't believe him, so he added, "This little one is a eunuch who follows the Ming emperor, so of course I wouldn't be wrong. Also, this little one is a Nuzanren, not a Han. I have long been looking forward to the army trampling on the great Ming dynasty and repeating the glory of the grassland people." Xi Ning was really afraid that he would die. At this moment, he didn't want to say anything nice, but he was afraid that Yes Hen would kill him if he was unhappy. Xi Ning's attitude made Yes Hen believe him. Even if the Ming emperor is dead, do you think that their capital is now in chaos? Previously, because the leader of the periodical king's guards, Tuj, angered Yang Chendong, all the spies of the Wara in the great Ming dynasty's capital were exposed and killed. If he wanted to understand the situation of the great Ming dynasty, he could only ask this little eunuch in front of him. Xi Ning was afraid that Yes Hen would kill him without asking any questions. If that happened, he wouldn't be able to show his value. Now, as long as the other party was willing to ask him, it proved that he was useful, and his life was not in danger. And in order to better express himself, and also to show his importance, he, who was kneeling on the ground, analyzed, "Leader, what the Ming dynasty does not lack the least is the emperor. The size of the imperial family is beyond our imagination. Even if the current emperor is dead, they can still elect a new emperor at any time." "What?" Xi Ning's answer made Yeshen very unhappy. "Doesn't that mean that it's useless for us to kill the Ming emperor?" No, it's not like that." Xi Ning shook his head like a rattle drum. "Although the royal family of the Ming dynasty is very large, it's not difficult for them to elect a new emperor. However, it's difficult for a new emperor to gain power in a short period of time, and this is our opportunity. Therefore, we can't announce the death of the Ming emperor immediately. If we do, it will only give the other party more time to prepare. We can first march to the capital, and when the army reaches the city, we can announce the death of the Ming emperor. This way, even if they elect a new emperor, it will be difficult for them to form any resistance. At that time, the new regime will be replaced by the old regime, and it will be chaotic. This way, we can suppress the city with our army. At that time, this lowly one can persuade my friends, and perhaps we can open the city gates without shedding a drop of blood and completely enter the capital." Zhu Qizhen was already dead, and to Xi Ning, he had no hope. Even if he could safely return to the capital, how could another emperor trust him as much as Yingzong did? Perhaps the other eunuchs would be eager to kill him. Since there was no way out, he might as well vote for Walla. With his contributions in planning, once Walla succeeded, he might be able to become a powerful eunuch like Wang Zhen. At this moment, Xi Ning seemed to see the glorious light of the future. In order to achieve this goal, he really did his best to plan for Yeshen. Okay. After hearing Xi Ning's words, Yeshen was also moved. Originally, he only wanted to attack the border of the Ming dynasty to show his strength. However, he didn't expect to win the battle and even kill the Ming emperor. Now that he had the opportunity to enter the capital of the Ming dynasty, how could he give it up? Thinking back, he once asked the Ming emperor to marry a princess to him for the purpose of seeking peace, but he was rejected. Now, if he could enter the capital, wouldn't he be able to choose all the princesses? He would also be able to take revenge for the humiliation he suffered back then. Xi Ning's proposal was accepted by Yeshen. Next, Walla's army began to clean up the battlefield. In terms of firearms alone, there were 14 great general cannons, 2,161 divine cannons, and 4,223 divine spears. In addition to other military necessities, it could be said that the harvest was quite bountiful. In the Ming army, Duke Yinggong Zhangfu, Marquis Tai Ning Chening, Prince Consort Jing Yuan, Count Pingxiang Chenhuai, Count Xiangqing Li Zhen, Count Suiyan Chen Sun, Count Shiwushen Rong, Governor Liang Cheng, Wang Gui, Scholar Chao Nai, Zhang Yi, Hanlin Academy attendant Scholar Zhang Yi, Left Governor Gong Quanan of the Office of Transmission, Dai Qingzu of Taichang Temple, Wang Yiju, Bao Yangzhua of the Imperial Secretariat, Yao Xian, Bao Hui, Censor Yugong, Pan Cheng, Qian Yu, Censor Zhang Hong, Huang Chang, Wei Zhen, Xia Cheng, Yin Hong, Tong Kund, Sun Qing, Lin Xiangfeng, Lang Zhong Qi Wang, Feng Shueming, Minister Counselor Wang Jian, Qing Siwen, Qing Cheng, Qing Cheng, Lu Duan, Manager Yu Jian, Zhang Tang, Jing Xian, Deputy Ma Yu of the Supreme Court, Yin Chang, Pedestrian Luo Ryong, Xia Guanjing of the Imperial Astronomer, Lu Xian of the Imperial Astronomer, Li Gong, Shiyu, and others all died in the battle. In this battle, more than half of the Ming army died, and a large amount of supplies were plundered by Yeshen. Only the Minister of the Supreme Court, Xiao Weizhen, and a few others luckily escaped. Then there were the 9 important officials that Yang Chendong had saved. The 500,000 soldiers left behind by Ming Qingzu Zhu Di had been completely wiped out, and the 3 most elite battalions had also been destroyed. The development of firearms for the army had been greatly hindered, and the gates to the capital had been opened. In the history of the Ming dynasty, this battle was known as the defeat of Tumu. This defeat had far-reaching effects, becoming the turning point for the Ming dynasty from the early to the middle stages. In the capital, when the news of Tumu's defeat reached the capital, everyone felt like they had been hit in the head with a stick. The streets were abuzz with discussion, and a chaotic situation was about to unfold. The imperial court was in an uproar, but no one was in charge. The imperial court was in a state of panic, and Zhu Qiyu, who was temporarily in charge of court affairs, felt as if he was sitting on pins and needles. He had originally thought that he was only temporarily in charge of court affairs, and if there were any problems, the officials would deal with them. He was just putting on an act, waiting for Emperor Zhu Qizhan to return so that he could report on his task perfectly and continue to be a king. But he had never imagined that the army would be defeated, and defeated so miserably. According to the news from the front lines, the field was littered with corpses. Now, there was no news of Emperor Zhu Qizhan. To say something disrespectful, no one knew whether he was dead or alive. Since no one knew whether the emperor was dead or alive, his burden had undoubtedly become very heavy. Just like now, all the officials were asking him for his opinion, causing him to feel uneasy and unsure of how to respond. Chapter 141. Prince Cheng, the military report says that Walla's army is coming to the capital. Baiyang Pass is in an emergency. If we don't do anything about it, Zijing Pass and Jiong Pass will be in danger. At that time, Walla's army will come to the capital. Wang Ji, the Minister of Personnel, as one of the old officials, stood out bravely and told Zhu Qiyu about the danger of the current situation. Then what should we do? Zhu Qiyu, who had never been in charge of the court, was at a loss. Prince Yu, Minister Wang, we should be discussing the whereabouts of His Majesty and whether he will be able to return. Hu Shao, the Minister of the Ministry of Rites, stepped forward with his ceremonial tablet in hand and spoke with a worried expression. A snake can't do without a head. No one could make the final decision. No one could think of the same thing. Minister Hu is right. The most important thing now is to find out where His Majesty is and where the other officials are. Jin Lian, the Minister of Justice, and Sherpu, the Minister of Works, both held their tablets and raised their heads high to express their thoughts. Well, if that's the case, go and find out where His Majesty is. Zhu Qiyu, Prince Cheng, nodded in agreement. If he knew that Zhu Qizhan was still alive, he would find a way to bring him back to preside over the situation. If he was gone. Zhu Qiyu didn't think too much about it for now. The court meeting ended in such a hurry that they did not manage to come to a conclusion. The spies of the Eastern Palace Guards and the Brocade Guards began to move. However, facing the Walla's army on the battlefield, it was not possible to find out the real information in a short time. Zhu Qiyu returned to the Nangong Palace with a worried look. The Nangong Palace was a side hall in the palace. Because it was only in a corner of the palace, few people came here. When Zhu Qizhan had left, he had arranged for his younger brother to stay here as a warning. Because the crown prince was only 2 years old and had just been established, he couldn't supervise the country. Therefore, Zhu Qiyu was asked to stay here. But it was just to let him stand there as a puppet. It was impossible for him to have any power or have any thoughts about the imperial power. The arrangement of the remote Nangong Palace was a warning to Zhu Qiyu that she had to grasp her own position and not overstep her authority. Zhu Qiyu did not have any thoughts about being assigned to Nangong's place. He was very clear about his own position. But that was based on Zhu Qizhan's triumphant return. Naturally, he had to return to his seat. But now, Zhu Qiyu's mood was very complicated. She walked back to the Nangong Palace, where she was temporarily staying. She happened to see a few eunuchs not far away. They seemed to be talking about her and pointing at something. For a moment, anger rose in his heart. It was true that he was a puppet, but at the same time, he was also a prince. How could he allow some little eunuchs to order him around? For a moment, anger rose from his heart, and a trace of killing intent appeared in his heart. However, this killing intent was forcefully suppressed as soon as it arose. Now that Ingzong's fate was unknown, what if he was on the way back? If he killed a little eunuch in the palace without permission, wouldn't that give him something to use against him? Zhu Qiyu knew very well that this elder brother of his was not very broad-minded. Zhu Qiyu wanted to keep the peace and suppress his anger. However, at this moment, a great eunuch in a python robe suddenly appeared from the side. He looked coldly at the four little eunuchs who were gathered together and discussing. You don't do anything in the palace, but talk nonsense here. Do you really have nothing better to do? Come on, drag them away and give each of them 40 strokes of the military rod. 40 strokes of the military rod was tantamount to taking their lives. When the four little eunuchs heard this, their expressions changed dramatically. They hurriedly knelt on the ground and begged for mercy. However, a few little eunuchs had already come over and pulled them up one by one and dragged them away. The little eunuchs dared to look down on him and paid the price with their lives. Zhu Qiyu felt relieved and vented a lot of the anger that had accumulated over the past few days. Your Highness Prince Cheng, I'm here to pay my respects. Just as Zhu Qiyu was feeling relieved, the eunuch who had shouted just now came to Zhu Qiyu with a slight bow. To be able to wear a python robe, needless to say, his status among the eunuchs was extremely high. In fact, there were only two people in the palace who could do this. One was Wang Zhen, who had already been killed, and the other was Jin Ning. Jin Ning, from Annan. After entering the palace, he served Taizong, Renzong, Xuanzong, and Ningzong. In the last years of Yongle, when he was about 30 years old, he was promoted to the right supervisor of the ceremony directorate. After Renzong ascended the throne, the people under the name of Zhang Ding, who was about to be exiled, were all rewarded to him, including real estate and trees, as well as the people and land of his son-in-law Tian Go. In the 7th year of Xuanda, 1432, because of his loyalty and diligence, he was also given a decree of exemption from death. Later, he was given a silver record and promoted to a eunuch of the ceremony directorate. Ingzong Zhu Qizhen was only 9 years old when he ascended the throne. Eunuch Wang Zhen would play with him, and he doted on Wang Zhen the most. Thus, Wang Zhen took out Jin Ning and the other eunuchs to take charge of the ceremony directorate. Jin Ning could only give in to him everywhere. Rather than giving in to him everywhere, it was better to say that he was hibernating. This was because he had always been the eunuch in charge of the ceremony directorate. Moreover, he was the first eunuch and enjoyed a very high position. It was just that Wang Zhen was in the limelight for a while, so no one paid attention to him. Jin Ying's sudden appearance at this time, and it looked like he was standing up for Zhu Qiyu. The meaning behind this was worth pondering. Zhu Qiyu's impression of Jin Ying was quite good. Not for anything else, but because this person was one of the few people who treated him with respect. Perhaps it was because they were both oppressed, or perhaps it was because they had the same experience and knew what hibernation meant, so naturally, there were too many similarities. Many thanks, Eunuch Jin. Zhu Qiyu smiled and spoke to Jin Ning with a smile in his eyes. At the same time, he bowed slightly to express his gratitude. Aya, you can't do that. Yu Wang has a precious body and is in charge of court affairs. How can you be so polite to a eunuch like me? Jin Ying's face was filled with fear and trepidation. His head was extremely low, as if he was about to make intimate contact with the ground with his knees. At the mention of being in charge of court affairs, Zhu Qiyu's expression turned bitter. His starry eyes were filled with power as he said, "What? Is eunuch Jin also here to make fun of my incompetence in court?" Jin Ning, who was said to be knowledgeable, could not be more familiar with this feeling. After all, he had experienced 4 emperors. But at this time, he still pretended to be very afraid and shook his head violently. Your Highness Yu Wang, please forgive me. This subject does not have such thoughts. On the contrary, this subject believes that Yu Wang was just born at the wrong time. Otherwise, with your great wisdom, it would not be difficult for you to become a wise ruler. Shoo! Zhu Qiyu was really frightened by Jin Ying's words. He looked around nervously. Eunuch Jin, don't harm this prince. Your Highness Yu Wang, don't worry. No matter what, this subject has been in the palace for so many years and has some power of my own. There is no third person within 100 steps of this place. You can rest assured. Jin Ying's face was full of confidence. This time, he had come to find Zhu Qiyu taking a certain risk. He had also come to express his loyalty and surrender. Since that was the case, how could he not make the necessary preparations? Let's go into the hall and talk. Zhu Qiyu knew that if Jining dared to say this, it must have been arranged. After all, once Zhu Qizhen found out that he had been in close contact with eunuchs in private, he would be suspected. He did not know what would happen to him. But Jining regarded himself as a subject, so his intentions were clear. Jining had been in the palace for so many years, so it was impossible for him not to know something that even Zhu Qiyu himself knew. And since he still dared to come, he must have something to say to him. At that moment, he strode into the hall with a considerate look. Jining followed half a step behind him. He followed closely behind with his head lowered. But if he was willing to raise his head at this moment, he would be able to see a very determined expression on his face. It was determination. Because this time, Jining had come to persuade Zhu Qiyu to take the throne. Regardless of whether Zhu Qizhen was alive or not, and whether he could return to the palace, in Jining's eyes, he was already a useless person. The change of imperial power had always been a matter of swords and blades. Since you dared to leave the palace, you should be prepared for a turtledove to take over your nest. If you wanted to blame someone, you could only blame Zhu Qizhen for trusting and doting on Wang Jin too much. Since you doted on someone else and did not give yourself a way out, don't blame him for looking for another way. Then, in the hall of the Nangong Palace, Zhu Qiyu and Jining chatted for a long time. No one knew what they talked about, but the various events that followed were enough to deduce what they had said and what they had planned. The Hu residence. After Hu Xiao and Hu Zhangning returned to the residence from court, they gave strict orders that no one was to leave the residence without their permission. Even the maids in charge of buying groceries and cooking in the residence had to set a time limit. When they went out, they had to bring a few more servants with them. With the situation at court in chaos, no one knew what would happen next. Based on Hu Zhao's many years of experience as an official, it was better to avoid unnecessary trouble. First, they would wait and see. Then, they would place heavy bets. This was a wise move. Because of this order, the atmosphere in the entire Hu residence became very tense and oppressive. In Hu Yan's room in the backyard, she was pacing back and forth anxiously. After a while, the servant girl, Xiao Qing, stumbled into the room with an anxious look on her face. "Little Qing, what did you find out? Is there any news of him?" When she saw her personal servant girl, Hu Yan stepped forward and grabbed her hands. Her face was full of anxiety and worry. Chapter 142. Me. Young Mississippi. The main, side, and back doors of the estate have all been closed. Without master's orders, no one is allowed to leave. Little Qing panted as she recounted what she had seen to Hu Yan. When she heard that all the doors of the estate had been closed, Hu Yan had a bad premonition. If nothing major had happened, such a change wouldn't have occurred. Her expression couldn't help but change slightly. When she looked at little Qing, there was a hint of anxiousness. "I asked you to gather information. What's the result?" "This." Little Qing shook her head. "I couldn't leave the estate, so I couldn't get any more information. However, when I asked Lieutenant Sun Chuang, he said that it seemed that the front lines had been defeated." "Defeated? Seems?" Hu Yan's heart skipped a beat. "Has this information been confirmed?" As she spoke, she tightened her grip on little Qing's wrist. "Young miss, you also know that with Sun Chuang's status, what he knows is limited. Young miss, hurry up and let go. You're hurting me." Little Qing's eyes were hazy with tears. Hu Yan's grip had truly hurt her. Hu Yan mechanically released her grip and sat back down in her chair. Her eyes were empty as she said, "He'll be fine, he'll be fine." Quite a few people in the capital were reacting in the same way as Hu Yan. This was especially true for the hundreds of family members of the officials who had accompanied the army. They could vaguely sense that something was wrong. Even though there was still no confirmation, the atmosphere had already turned icy cold. As a result, the business of the immortal abode and the realm beyond heaven began to wane. In the past, the seats had always been in short supply, but now, they had lost at least 30% of their customers. They no longer had to wait in line to spend money. 5 days later, amidst this oppressive atmosphere, a group of soldiers arrived at the gates of the capital. The leader had a strange appearance. He had a square face, a tall stature, and a knee-length beard. He was skilled in horseback riding and archery, and a large saber hung beside his sturdy horse. He exuded a fierce killing intent. However, at this moment, there wasn't the slightest bit of killing intent in his eyes. There was only anxiety. He was Datong Prefecture's Governor Shiheng. Shiheng, Marquis Xining Songying, Wujin Bo Zhu Mian and the others fought against the Walla cavalry at Jianghu. After the deaths of Song and Zhu, he had returned alone. Along the way, he had recruited soldiers and brought back several hundred cavalry. This time, he had returned to the capital to atone for his crimes by performing meritorious deeds. Shiheng came back with the latest news from the front line. When Zhu Qiyu, the imperial tutor prince, found out about this, he immediately summoned all the fourth rank and above officials in the capital to the palace for a discussion. In the imperial court, Shiheng knelt before Zhu Qiyu and recounted in detail what he had experienced and what he had seen. After he finished speaking, he continued to kowtow to the ground. As he kowtowed, he said, "Your humble servant is incompetent." At this moment, Shiheng was acting like a loyal and brave general. Instead of saying that he was repenting, it was better to say that he was showing off his achievements. "General Shi, please rise. This prince wants to ask you, how is the emperor? How are the other officials?" Zhu Qiyu, the imperial tutor prince, asked anxiously. However, others did not know that there was a ball of fire burning in his chest at this moment. "Your Highness Imperial Tutor Prince, the Emperor has ascended to heaven." Shiheng slowly raised his head and blinked his eyes hard. But no matter how one looked at him, he did not look like he was about to cry. His expression was still vivid, giving people the feeling that he was very sad and in pain. What? Zhu Qiyu's body trembled when he heard this. He almost slipped off his chair. Fortunately, Ji Ning, who was standing to the side, helped him in time, so he did not make a fool of himself. At this moment, the other officials were also shocked. Some of the timid ones even knelt on the ground and began to cry. There were also some officials who could not believe Shiheng's words. After all, according to the battle report, the Vola cavalry and infantry only had 60 to 70,000 soldiers. However, the Great Ming Empire had sent an army of 500,000 soldiers, including many elite troops. How could they be defeated? Moreover, they were defeated so thoroughly that even the lives of the emperor and hundreds of officials were lost. Governor Shi, did you see the death of the emperor and the officials with your own eyes? Among the officials, Wang Ji, the minister of the Ministry of Personnel, was relatively calm. He really could not understand how they could have been defeated so miserably when they had outnumbered the enemy by 7 to 8 times. No, this official did not see the death of the emperor and the officials with my own eyes. But because of Wang Jin's careless command, the army did not care about each other. The general did not know the soldiers, and the soldiers did not know the general. In addition, there was a lack of water and food, and the morale was low. When faced with the elite cavalry of the Walla, they fled or were injured. It was chaos. This official did not know where the emperor and the officials were at that time. But later, when we fought with a small number of the Walla cavalry, I learned the news from the captives. This official did not dare to delay any longer, so I killed my way out with my men. Shiheng kept beautifying himself as he spoke. He gave people the impression that he had given up on fighting the enemy in order to bring back news. But in reality, he had heard this news from some of the great Ming Dynasty's deserters who understood the Walla language. Impudent! How can you insult my father like this? Just as Shiheng finished speaking, 3 people walked out from the crowd. They were the commander of the Brocade Guards, Ma Shun, primary 3rd rank, the commander of the Brocade Guards, Wang Shan, secondary 3rd rank, and the commander of the brocade guards, Wang Lin, primary 4th rank. When the two of them heard that Shiheng had put all the blame on Wang Zhen, how could they let it go? One of them was Wang Zhen's confidant, and the other was Wang Zhen's nephew. They were deeply indebted to Wang Zhen and would not allow anyone to speak ill of Wang Zhen. As soon as the two of them jumped out, Jining, who was standing next to the throne, raised his eyebrows. He had been waiting for this moment for far too long. It was precisely because of these people that his authority had been completely stripped away. Now that he finally had a chance to take revenge and eliminate his dissidents, how could he let go of such an opportunity? He had even summoned officials of the 4th rank and above to discuss this matter precisely to lure out Wang Zhen's confidants. If Yang Qindong were here, he would definitely be suspicious. History had already begun to deviate from its original course. In reality, because of his appearance, many things had already changed. It was precisely because of the establishment of the realm beyond heaven and the immortal abode that Wang Zhen was able to earn money so quickly that he found it difficult to put anyone aside from the emperor. This made Jining even more dissatisfied with him than in history. The three of them stepped out at the same time and glared at Shiheng, giving him a fright. I'm only speaking the truth. What do you want to do? What do we want to do? Scoundrels like you who spread false information should be put to death. Men, drag him away and behead him. Ma Shun's gaze was as sharp as a sword as he stared at Shiheng. He looked like he wouldn't give up until he had skinned him alive. As soon as he spoke, 6 tall, burly embroidered uniform guards walked in. They were dressed in flying robes. As soon as the embroidered uniform guards appeared, the atmosphere in the imperial court froze. The expressions of all the officials changed greatly. It was clear that they had all suffered at the hands of these people before. They were terrified from the bottom of their hearts. At this moment, no one noticed that the Mastiff Prince, Zhu Qiyu, and Jining, the eunuch of the ceremony directorate, were exchanging glances. It was clear that they had already known that something like this was going to happen. Zhu Qiyu nodded lightly, as if in tacit agreement. Jining took a step forward, and his voice suddenly grew louder. Come. Why aren't you arresting these 3 traitors for disrupting the imperial court? Behead them as punishment. Jining suddenly stood up and said that she wanted to kill 3 people instead of 1. For a moment, the emperor and his subjects were stunned. Even Ma Shun and the other 2 had a look of surprise in their eyes. They could not understand how Jining could make a mistake in such a situation. They didn't understand earlier because the 6 embroidered uniform guards hadn't made a move yet. But when the 6 of them stepped forward and subdued Ma Shun, Wang Shan, and Wang Lin, they finally understood what was going on. Jining, you traitor, what are you trying to do? Let me go immediately, or I'll make sure you're beheaded. Being subdued by 2 extremely strong embroidered uniform guards, Ma Shun resisted a few times without any success. So, he started cursing loudly. Jining, who had been prepared for this, had a cold expression. He said in a disdainful tone, "You're about to die, but you're still so arrogant. Come, drag him away and behead him." When the 6 strong embroidered uniform guards heard this, they dragged Ma Shun and the other 2 out of the imperial court. Not long after, 3 shouts came from outside. Needless to say, Ma Shun and the other 2 had been beheaded. Their most loyal lackeys had been killed. The officials were all trembling with fear, especially those who had previously sided with Wang Zhen. They were so nervous that they broke out in cold sweat. They didn't know if Jining, who seemed to be in control of the imperial court, would suddenly attack them. Killing people was to establish authority and also to intimidate. Now it seemed that the effect was quite good. Jining sighed softly in his heart. Don't blame me. You forced me to do this. After giving himself an explanation, he suddenly turned and knelt down in front of Zhu Qiyu, the Duke of Yan. Your Highness, the Duke of Yan, now that the Ying sect is in trouble, the Great Ming is in danger. Please ascend the throne, preside over the situation, and lead the Great Ming back to glory. When Jining knelt down, the entire imperial court fell silent. It was so quiet that one could hear a pin drop. Obviously, this was something that no one had foreseen or prepared for. But this silence only lasted for a moment. Shiheng suddenly pounded his head on the ground and shouted, "This official requests the Duke of Yan to ascend the throne and establish the empire." With Shiheng taking the lead, the officials who reacted quickly knelt down one by one and begged the Duke of Yan, Zhu Qiyu, to ascend the throne and become the emperor. Shiheng had said that the Ying sect, Zhu Qizhen, had already died on the battlefield. Even so, someone had to be the emperor. Now it seemed that with the status of regent, the younger brother of the emperor, and the bloodline of the Zhu family, it was perfectly justified for him to inherit the empire. Chapter 143. With the situation settled, all the officials knelt on the ground and cheered. Since ancient times, there was a saying that there were 3 requests. Zhu Qiyu immediately rejected them. After that, the officials invited him, rejected him, and invited him a 3rd time. Only then was the matter settled. Immediately, everyone and Zhu Qiyu went to see the Empress Dowager to go through the final approval process. That day, Zhu Qiyu became the emperor. Because the war was imminent, the situation was urgent. The officials knelt on the ground and recognized Zhu Qiyu as the emperor. His title was Daizong, and his name was Jingtai. He made Yingzong's son, Zhu Jianxian, later Xianzong, the crown prince. This important imperial edict was passed down by Jining. Now, Jining had become a powerful official like Wang Zhen during Yingzong's time. Jining also received the favor of Empress Dowager's son and the new emperor. Whether it was Wang Zhen or Jining, this was the result of the system and environment. The Ming dynasty was an unprecedentedly powerful dynasty. This was why the emperor dared to give power to the eunuchs. Although the eunuchs of the Ming dynasty had so much power, when the emperor really wanted to punish them, he only needed to write an imperial edict and these eunuchs would be doomed eternally. Lu Jin and Wei Zhongxian both ended up like this. Thus, the emperor was not worried about the eunuchs being disloyal. Secondly, the emperor had no choice but to use the eunuchs. The Ming dynasty officials were very powerful. At their peak, they dared to publicly criticize the emperor. Although the emperor was the son of heaven and had unparalleled power. But in front of all the officials, he was all alone. In order to break the unity of the officials, the emperor could only use the eunuchs to restrict the power of the officials. Although the eunuchs were mostly dark, they all knew that the only thing they could rely on was the emperor. Thus, they were all loyal. Thus, to the emperor, the eunuchs were more reliable than the officials. Now that Jining had taken the initiative, she should have immediately attacked Wang Zhen's faction. However, this was not the result of a peaceful development. It was the result of a crisis. At this time, the military reports said that Walla's army was approaching. If the palace was in chaos now, it would be bad for the overall situation. In order to give Emperor Jing and Zhu Qiyu a good impression, Jining didn't attack Wang Zhenyu supporters. Instead, she began to unite the majority of the people and prepared to fight the enemy together. It was because of his generosity that many eunuchs took the initiative to defect and change their allegiance. Even those who were loyal to Wang Zhen became much more well-behaved and hid among the crowd. For example, Wang Zhen's trusted eunuch of the imperial horse supervisor, Chen Guan, had become an old dog that didn't bite. He had become very obedient. Whenever Jining gave an order, he would completely obey. There wasn't the slightest bit of difference. There were also eunuchs Chao Jixiang, Gao Rang, Mao Mu, and Xian Sengbao, the Imperial Horse Directorate's chief eunuch, who were all very low-key. Don't cause trouble, and do your best to complete the tasks assigned to you. However, everyone could see that these people were still waiting to see the situation. They were waiting for the arrival of Tile's army before making a final decision. In this regard, Jining didn't have any better ideas. Zhu Qiyu was willing to delegate power to her, but not without a bottom line. If he wanted to unify the group of eunuchs, which even Wang Zhen hadn't been able to do, she was afraid that the first unlucky one would be her. It was still the same saying, I can use you, but I also have to be wary of you. This was the basic attitude of the emperor towards eunuchs. Jining became the eunuch in charge of power and was promoted to chief eunuch of the ceremony directorate by Zhu Qiyu. For a time, she held great power. Her fangs were unfurled. The group of eunuchs wasn't easy to move. They were all under the emperor's nose. If there was any wind blowing, it would be very difficult to hide. Thus, she began to move against the officials. She arranged for Lu Gui, who had just been promoted to commander of the brocade guard, to walk through the homes of the officials, looking for their weaknesses and problems to threaten. Lu Gui brought the new commander of the brocade guard, Han Ji, to visit the important officials one by one. The Minister of Works, Shi Pu, had originally gotten his position from Wang Zhen. After Wang Zhen fell from power, he used Lu Gui to bribe Jining to keep his position. Jining's family also asked for stone, grass, and other materials to build a private room for Jining and so on from the officials of the Military Preparation Office and internal envoy Yi Jingrong. Many of the important officials were threatened because of this. The lighter ones were given a sum of money to settle the matter. There were even some who were directly sent to prison. As the residents of the Minister of Rights, Humang, the Hu manor also suffered a lot from Lu Gui and Han Ji. Not only did they give a large sum of money, Hu Changning was also ordered to reflect on his mistakes at home on the grounds that he was suspended from his duties. Jining had made such a big move that some of the officials who liked to curry favor could no longer remain calm. They all thought of ways to establish a relationship with her. Among them was the head of the Hanlin Academy, Wang Go, who was also Yang Duo's husband. Wang Go had given all of his family's gold and silver to the new commander of the brocade guard, Han Ji. As a result, he had been promoted from the original 9th rank to the 7th rank editor. Not only had he been promoted, but he had also taken the position of his former superior, Wang Si. Although Wang Si's grandfather, the Minister of Appointments, Wang Ji, had also been threatened, he had only given money to ensure his safety and had not expressed his loyalty to Jining. His position was not easy to move, but his family members, such as his grandson Wang Si, had been removed from their positions and thrown back home. Originally, when they were in the Hanlin Academy, because Wang Si and Yang Chendong had a good personal relationship, he had always suppressed Wang Go and made him suffer. Now, not only had he been promoted, he had also removed the mountain above his head. Next, the first thing Wang Go, who was proud of his position in the government, did was find Yang Duo. He said that he had taken a fancy to the servant girl Xiao Chui and wanted her to warm his room. Xiao Chui was one of the 10 servant girls that Yang Chendong had given to Yang Duo. She was quite beautiful, and Wang Go had also coveted her for a long time. However, she had been sent by Yang Chendong. Even if he had the intention, he did not have the courage. However, now that he had heard that Yang Chendong and Yingzong had died on the battlefield together, he no longer had anything to restrain himself from. Thus, he wanted to show off his power as a man. Yang Duo naturally rejected Wang Go's request. Xiao Chui also threatened to kill herself, saying that if Wang Go touched a single finger of hers, she would die in front of him. If that really happened, it would be inevitable that there would be endless trouble. Wang Go knew that he could not do it. In a fit of anger, he decided to divorce his wife and divorce Yang Duo. At the same time, he married a distant sister of Han Ji as his first wife. During this period of time, because of his 6th brother Yang Chendong, Wang Go's attitude towards Yang Duo had changed. As a woman, and a married woman at that, it was fine if she wanted to live a good life. However, she did not expect that misfortune would descend so quickly. Before she could react, the divorce paper was in front of her. In ancient times, many women divorced their husbands because of emotional discord or other reasons. If it was an amicable divorce, it proved that it was not a woman's problem. Naturally, it would be much easier for the woman to find another man. However, if she was divorced, it was equivalent to carrying a bad reputation for the rest of her life. It would be difficult for her to find a suitable husband. Even if she was married, she would often be looked down upon by her husband's family because of this matter. Accompanied by 10 maids, Yang Duo left the Wang family. She did not even look back because this was the place where she felt sad. After leaving the Wang family, Yang Duo was considered homeless. In the end, she decided to go to the Yang family village. In the village, when she saw Qiao Yin and Madame Shui, who were already waiting there, she burst into tears. The three women quickly hugged each other and cried together. The news of Yingzong and the officials' deaths naturally spread to the Yang family village. Qiao Yin and Madame Shui did not know how many times they had cried because of this. Yang Si and Yang Lu, who stayed at home, tried to persuade them, saying that no matter who was in trouble, the young master would be fine. However, this was only taken as comforting words. No one believed them. Even if others did not believe them, Yang Si and Yang Lu were not discouraged. Instead, they met up with the deputy chief of the security bureau, Yang San, who had been active in the capital. After a discussion, the three of them decided that before the young master returned, they had to protect the Yang family village and not allow anyone to cause trouble here. As for Yang Chendong's safety, the three of them did not worry too much about it. No one knew more about the sixth young master's background than they did. Even in the midst of chaos, it was really difficult to hurt the sixth young master with just Tiger's Mane, Beta Persei, Yang Wu, the first guard, and the 100 soldiers of the Cold Vanguard led by Xiao Feng. It was because they firmly believed that Yang Chendong would be fine. The confidence of the three of them soared, and they secretly strengthened the security of the Yang family village. They even decided that if anyone dared to cause trouble here, they would be killed. At the same time, the three of them also decided to temporarily give up on the business of heaven beyond heaven and the immortal abode. They would invite all the important figures in the young master's eyes back to the Yang family village for protection. It was precisely this appropriate action that left some people disappointed, but it also left some people stamping with rage. The one who was stamping with rage was a member of the Yang family. It was Yang Chendong's second brother, Yang Rang. Just like how Wang Go had donated all his money to curry favor with Ji Ning, Yang Rang had chosen to give his six brothers' businesses, the immortal abode and heaven beyond heaven, to Ji Ning. For this reason, he first went to the palace and handed over a letter of greeting, stating his intentions. Ji Ning was currently in a position of great power. She had to wait on Zhu Qiyu and curry his favor, and she also had to get rid of those who disobeyed her and deal with those who disobeyed her. He was just a trifling sixth-rank official. Wanting to see him was as difficult as ascending to the heavens. But when the eunuchs relayed Yang Rang's words, Ji Ning was tempted. The immortal abode and heaven beyond heaven were reputed to be the most profitable businesses in the capital. There were even rumors that the great Ming Dynasty's tax revenue couldn't compare to the amount of money earned from these two businesses. Jin Ying's eyes had long since turned red with envy. This was because Yang Chendong and Wang Zhen were on good terms. Even if she wanted to get her hands on them, she couldn't find the opportunity. Now, Yang Chendong's second brother wanted to give these two businesses to her. This was like a meat pie falling from the sky. Ji Ning immediately summoned Yang Rang in the midst of her busy schedule. When Yang Rang saw Ji Ning, he immediately knelt, looking like a servant meeting his master. It seemed like he wanted nothing more than to be Ji Ning's dog. Chapter 144. Ji Ning was naturally overjoyed by this attitude. After all, this person was the son of Yang Rong of the Three Yangs. Him treating him with such respect was definitely a sign of respect. He immediately put on a courteous front and helped Yang Rang to his feet. Afterwards, the host and guest sat together and chatted happily. Yang Rang's attitude was resolute. He had to give the realm beyond heaven and the immortal abode to Ji Ning. In response, Ji Ning expressed an appropriate amount of magnanimity. He agreed to take over these two properties, but he wouldn't treat Yang Rang unfairly. He said that he would give him 1/10 of the profits and let him manage them. All he needed to do was ensure the safety of the facilities. Yang Rang was overjoyed by the fact that this negotiation was not going to be taken seriously. After all, 1/10 of the profits was still a lot of money. At that moment, the two of them hit it off. In order to make Yang Rang's operation even smoother, Jining even transferred 2 small banners of the embroidered uniform guards for him to use. Not only that, she also sent her servant, Zhao Xian, to cooperate with him. They had to get the deeds for these 2 places as soon as possible. Before the mission began, Yang Rang's official position was directly promoted from the 6th rank official of the Ministry of Rights to the 4th rank official of the Zhan Department. Although this position didn't have much authority, Jining clearly stated that he could continue to be promoted after taking over the realm beyond heaven and the immortal abode. He was suddenly promoted from rank 6 to rank 4. This was a qualitative change. Yang Rang's eyes were filled with hope. He even believed that he would have to rely on himself to develop the Yang clan. As for whether or not he'd gotten everything because he'd thrown in his lot with the eunuchs. Once he succeeded, who would care about asking so many questions? After leaving the imperial palace, the group of 20 headed straight for the immortal abode. However, when they came here excitedly, they were faced with a closed door. Let's go take a look at the realm beyond heaven. Yang Rang frowned. Everyone went to the neighboring heavens beyond, but it was the same here. It was empty. They could even see the emptiness of the interior through the transparent glass. There were no goods left, not even a guard was left behind. This gave Yang Rang a bad feeling. Although news of Ingzong's defeat had already reached the capital, the new emperor had already ascended to the throne. There weren't any businesses that had closed because of this. Perhaps he had been affected a little, but it wasn't to the extent of not doing it anymore. What's going on? Zhao Xian, Jin Ying's servant, was also agitated by the scene in front of him and asked angrily. Yang Rang hurriedly bowed and revealed a flattering smile. It's fine, it's fine. They must be too cowardly and moved all the goods back to the Yang Chendong manor. We'll go there now. Don't worry, I'm Yang Chendong's second brother and the owner of that place. No one will dare to stop me. That better be the case. Zhao Xian snorted. Even without Zhao Xian saying anything, Ang Rang knew the importance of this matter. Jining was interested in the benefits that the immortal abode and the heavens beyond heaven could bring her, not these 2 properties. Without the goods and services, these 2 places were not worth much. Yang Rang's forehead was already covered in cold sweat as he hurriedly led the group of people towards the Yang manor. In the Yang manor, it was as if they were facing a great enemy. Dao Shao, who had been hiding in the shadows, had already led a small team of 10 people to the open and found a suitable location outside the manor. They were ready to destroy the enemy. In the manor, Yang Si and Yang Lu each held a 95-style sword and kept wiping it and checking their equipment. They knew that in the chaos and with the young master not around, there would definitely be someone who had designs on the Yang manor. However, they did not know who it was. As they waited, a horse carriage entered Dao Zhao's line of sight. Who are you? Stop the carriage. The Yang manor is in front. Unauthorized personnel are not allowed to enter. Dao Shao jumped out from the bushes by the road and stood in the middle of the road. This was because it was only a horse carriage and he could not see any danger. Otherwise, he would not have appeared so casually. Stop. The coachman shouted and stopped the carriage. Then, the coachman took off the felt hat on his head, revealing a young and valiant face. Brother, I am Sun Chuang, a servant of Minister Hu from the Ministry of Rights. My young lady is in the carriage. Sun Chuang. Dao Shao knew this name. As one of the captains of the young master's guards, he naturally had to be familiar with certain situations. This was to prevent a flood from flooding the Dragon King's temple. Yes, you know me. Sun Chuang looked at Dao Shao with a suspicious gaze. As a captain of the embroidered uniform guards, even if he had never seen someone before, he would still have an impression of them. For example, he was sure that he had never met the person in front of him before. Facing Sun Chuang's question, Dao Shao did not answer. Instead, he shook his head and said, "It is not important whether I know you or not. Who is in the carriage? Please open the curtain and take a look. Who are you? I have been to the Yang Manor a few times. Why have I not seen you before?" When Sun Chuang heard that he was going to open the curtain, his face revealed a sullen expression. In ancient times, when a young lady went out, she would not easily show her face to outsiders. Otherwise, where would the words, reserved, and well-bred, come from? Seeing that Sun Shuang was questioning him, Dao Xiao replied with a cold laugh, "Forget it. Since you are not willing to open the curtain, please go back." After he finished speaking, he waved his hand, indicating for Sun Shuang to drive the carriage away from the Yang manor. "Wait." At this moment, a woman's voice came from the carriage. Then, the window opened, revealing Hu Yan's peerless face. However, at this moment, her face was filled with anxiety. Her face was not as rosy as before, but rather pale. Who was Hu Yan? She was Yang Chendong's future wife candidate. As one of the captains of the guards, how could Dao Xiao not know her? When he raised his head and saw that it was indeed this young lady, he immediately lowered his head and clasped his hands together, sorry for the offense. This is a critical time. Please forgive me. You should go back quickly. After Dao Xiao knew who was in the carriage, he did not even have the courage to look at her. He no longer had the stern look he had before. Instead, he lowered his eyes and looked like a little wife who had been bullied. In Hu Yan's eyes, this performance actually caused her to unconsciously feel joy in her heart. These were the people by the Dong Shuai's side. They were always so respectful to her. They were even more respectful to her than the people in the Hu clan. "Officer Sun, drive the carriage." Hu Yan collected her thoughts and lowered the curtain. Then, her voice rang out. Dao Xiao stepped aside to open the path behind him. When he turned around, he made a gesture that no one else could understand. However, Yang Si and Yang Lu, who were in the manor, saw it clearly. They knew that young mistress who had arrived. The door to the inner courtyard of the manor immediately opened. The carriage continued to move as usual. In the carriage, Shao Qing hugged Hu Yan's arm tightly and said with a worried tone, "Young lady, we just left the Hu clan like this. Will Master be angry if he finds out?" "So what if he's angry? I was born to be the Dong Shuai's woman and die to be his ghost. If he wants me to go back, he can only do it as a corpse," Hu Yan said with a determined expression. Ever since Shiheng returned to the capital and news of Yingzhong and the hundreds of officials dying in battle spread, Hu Yan had shed countless tears. When she could no longer cry, she made a bold decision. She came to the Yang clan manor and lived here as Yang Chendong's wife. The two of them did not go through any ceremony. They did not even make any basic promises. When Yang Chendong left the capital, he did not even say goodbye. Logically speaking, when Hu Yan married someone else, she would not make any moral mistakes. However, she still made this decision. From this, it could be seen that she really liked Yang Chendong. She did not covet his ability to earn money and wanted to become a rich wife. In front of Shao Qing, she expressed her attitude once again. Hu Yan thought of Sun Shuang and asked with a concerned tone, "Shao Qing, you asked Officer Sun to send us out this time. Have you made plans for the future?" "I have." At this time, it was Shao Qing's turn to reveal a determined expression. "I have already talked to him. In the future, we will follow Mississippi. As for whether Master will punish us or not, we will accept whatever the result is." This he was naturally referring to Sun Shuang. It was also because of love that Sun Shuang promised Shao Qing to help her leave the Hu clan and come to the Yang clan manor. This was the result of love. However, at that time, this kind of love was not looked favorably upon. Sun Shuang also had another identity. He was the officer of the embroidered uniform guards and Hu Changning's personal servant. Based on the fact that he had a private relationship with Shao Qing without his master's permission, even if he was killed at that time, no one would say anything. Shao Qing's complexion was not very good. Although her words were very firm, her whole body seemed to be trembling. It could be seen that she was afraid. Hu Yan patted the back of her hand and said, "Shao Qing, don't be afraid. Miss is here. If father punishes you, I will take responsibility." Mississippi, the touched Xiaoqing was about to cry. She was not moved because Hu Yan was standing up for her. In fact, if something really happened, as a miss, she could not help much. She was moved because Hu Yan's feelings for her were not like that of a servant girl, but like a sister. The two were hugging each other when the inner gate of the Yang clan manor opened. Qiao Yin, Madame Shui, and Yang Duo, who had heard the news, came out to welcome them. Madame Xiang was also in the backyard. Seeing these people coming out, her eyes were full of envy. Cui Na saw it clearly. What? Sister, are you envious? I'm envious, Lady Xiang replied without any hesitation. Even if Dong Shui can't come back, or even if he is dead, do you still envy them? You know, you are now a good girl and a virgin. If you want to marry in the future, you will not suffer too much. Cui Na knew that Madame Xiang liked the sixth young master, but had not been accepted. At that time, she felt injustice for her. Why could other people become Dong Shui's woman? What was the difference between Madame Xiang's appearance and figure? Chapter 145. But now, after learning that Yang Chendong might have died on the battlefield, she felt a little lucky for some reason. One of the advantages was that she didn't give herself to Dong Shui too early. But she didn't expect that Lady Xiang was still envious of Lady Shui and Lady Qiao Yin. No. Lady Shui shook her head firmly after hearing Cui Na's words. You can't find a man as outstanding as Dong Shui in the whole world. Even if he's dead, I'm already his woman in Han Xiang's heart. As she spoke, her eyes couldn't stop tearing up. Obviously, it was too late for regrets at this moment. If she had known this would happen, she would have given herself to Dong Shui. It would have been better than regretting it for the rest of her life. Let's not talk about how the women would welcome Hu Yan and how they would cry when they saw each other. Let's talk about the group of people outside the Yang village. They were a group of unusual guests. The reason why they were said to be uninvited guests was because they all had excited expressions on their faces. Moreover, they didn't seem to have any intention of stopping when they entered the Yang village. Stop. The gate of the village opened, and Yang Si strode out to welcome them. While they were still far away, he fired the 95 style in his hand into the sky. Bang! The crisp sound immediately shocked the group from afar. Then, the sound of horses reining in their horses sounded one after another. From this point alone, it could be seen that people were afraid of death, especially those who seemed to be awe-inspiring. They often cherished their lives more and were the most timid. Yang Rang and Zhao Xian were riding at the front. The sudden gunshot really frightened them. They reined in their horses in a hurry and almost lost control of their bodies and fell from their horses. Twisting their bodies, they dismounted from their horses. Their faces were as unsightly as they could be. When Zhao Xian's feet finally landed safely on the ground, he pointed to the front with a flustered and exasperated face and said, "Who are they? How can they have firearms in their hands? Where are the laws of the great Ming dynasty?" It was no wonder that Zhao Xian was so angry. Firearms were important weapons of the imperial court, and they wouldn't be shown to people easily. Even the 3 firearm battalions were very strict with the management of firearms. Unless they had the special permission of the emperor and the Ministry of War, it was difficult for anyone to take them out. But now, this thing had unexpectedly appeared in the Yang village. How could they not be shocked, angry, and indignant? The more Yang rang, the more angry he was. But he didn't know these things. In order to calm Yang's anger, he kept nodding and said, "Mr. Zhao, don't be angry. I'll ask them what's going on." As he spoke, Yang Rang turned to look at Yang Si, who was standing at the entrance of the Yang family's inner courtyard with a firearm. Instead of acting like a grandson, he roared like a master, "Who are you? How dare you block our path? Do you know who I am? I'm Stings, What's the reason for entering the village without permission?" Facing the imposing Yang Rang, Yang Si naturally wasn't afraid. even though he had already recognized that this person was the sixth young master's second brother. But at this time, he had brought so many embroidered uniform guards with him. His purpose was as clear as day. With regards to his own brother trying to steal the sixth young master's wife, he was no longer a member of the Yang family in his eyes. So why should he be polite? Yang Rang heard that he was just a servant, and it sounded so sarcastic. Since when did a servant dare to show off in front of his master? He didn't know how his sixth brother usually managed things. How could he not distinguish between master and servant? Humph! How dare a little servant hold a firearm? Let me tell you, you've already violated the laws of the great Ming dynasty. Now kneel and beg for mercy. For the sake of my sixth brother, I'll only kill you. I won't implicate the others in the village. Yang Rang seemed to be magnanimous, but unknowingly, he had already placed himself in the position of the head of the Yang family village. When the other servants heard their master's words, they must have been terrified. But this was Yang Si. He even beat up the messenger of the Walla. How could he shrink back because of these words? He first shook his head, and then with a trace of disdain in his eyes, he said, "First, how I got the firearm is none of your business. Second, a man can only live standing, not kneeling. Third, nothing will happen to the sixth young master, let alone die. Your so-called sixth brother is simply nonsense." The rebuttals entered his ears one by one. Zhao Xian's expression changed greatly, and he added fuel to the fire. "Master Yang? Are these the servants of the Yang family? How can they be so rude?" Zhao Xian's words were like a heavy hammer, and Yang Rang's face was as red as a monkey's butt. Ever since he was a child, no one had ever insulted him like this since he learned that he was Yang Rong. But now, in front of a servant, and in front of a servant of the Yang family, he was being laughed at. How could he hold back his anger? Immediately, he looked at Yang Si with eyes that were spitting fire. "As the second master of the Yang family, I order you to kneel and beg for mercy immediately. Otherwise, I'll exterminate 3 generations of your family." He even said something like exterminating 3 generations of his family. It could be seen how angry and hateful he was at this moment. If looks could eat people, Yang Si would have been eaten by Yang Rang countless times. Yang Rang roared furiously. At this time, Yang Rang did not look like a scholar at all. Looking at him, it really gave people a terrifying feeling. Yang Si was not an ordinary person, let alone an ordinary person. If shouting could make him submit, then Yang Chendong's previous hellish training would really be useless. At this moment, he was completely unfazed by Yang Rang's towering rage. He was still as calm and collected as ever, as if these words were not directed at him. He was just a bystander watching others put on a show. Seeing that Beta Persei was so angry, but the person opposite him did not have the slightest intention of retreating, Zhao Xian did not put his hopes on him. Instead, he turned to the brocade guards beside him and said, "Go, I'll leave this place to you. Since some people don't know what's good for them, there's no need to keep them." Zhao Xian's murderous intent was out, and he decided to suppress everything with bloody martial arts. Perhaps there were times when reasoning was useless. Whoever had the bigger fist would be the one who had the final say. However, the one who had the biggest fist was not Zhao Xian, but Yang Si, who held the 95 style. Ever since he followed Yang Chendong, he rarely had the chance to touch a gun. After all, once a gunshot was heard, it would inevitably attract the attention of all parties. Only when he really wanted to do it, would he ask for leave from Tiger's Mane and go to Foul Crow Mountain Forest, which was more than 10 miles away from Yang Village, to shoot a few shots. And now, the opportunity to shoot was given to him. How could Yang Si not grasp it well? There was a hint of slyness in his eyes, and he revealed a playful expression. When he saw the brocade guards start to run towards him, he raised his hand and pulled the trigger with his finger. A crisp bang sound was heard. The second gunshot caused the embroidered uniform guards who were running forward to stop. Based on their instincts, they knew that there was danger ahead. "What are you afraid of? He's only one person with a firearm. There are so many of you, how can that firearm fire continuously? Zhao Xian's shout came from behind. Although he was also very curious, he did not see Yang Si fill the gun with gunpowder and fire a second shot. However, relying on the fact that there were so many people, he still shouted with full confidence. His shout seemed to have given the embroidered uniform guards courage. Thinking that the opponent was indeed only one person with a firearm, and that there were more than 20 of them, what was there to be afraid of? After looking at each other, they gathered their courage and continued to run forward. Yang Si's mouth slightly twitched. He was clearly very happy, but he still pretended to be helpless as he muttered, "You forced me to do this. Hee hee, then let's see who's stronger and see if there are people in this world who aren't afraid of death." The 95 style was raised, and it was a stark contrast to the previous frivolous attitude. At this moment, Yang Si was incomparably serious. His eyes were like an eagle's as he stared at the leg of the brocade guard running at the front. His right index finger lightly moved, and his shoulder was rebounded by the recoil of the firearm. In the next second, the bullet spun out of the barrel and accurately landed on the thigh of the brocade guard. Bang! The person fell. Their coordination was extremely synchronized. Bang bang! After this shot, Yang Si fired 2 more bullets. 3 brocade guards fell to the ground one after another. Even though they fell to the ground, they did not forget to cry out in pain. At the same time, they rolled on the ground to show what kind of pain they were experiencing. This scene also frightened the others. At this moment, the brocade guards could not help but stop. Then, it was unknown who took the lead, but after a shout, they all ran back in the direction of Zhao Xian. At this moment, Zhao Xian was also scared silly. He completely forgot to urge the brocade guards to continue their charge. This was the first time he saw a firearm that could fire continuously. Moreover, it was so accurate and so fast. All of this was beyond his understanding. The fleeing brocade guards returned to Zhao Xian's side. Then, they all looked at Yang Si with frightened eyes. It was as if he was a murderous demon. It made people afraid, terrified, and powerless. "How is it? Do you still want to charge?" Looking at the 3 people on the ground, Yang Si seemed to be very satisfied with his masterpiece. He even whistled happily. Then, his face became serious again and he said, "I already said that you are not allowed to charge into the Yang family manor. You just didn't listen. Now, this is the result of your own actions. Immediately take the injured people away and scram." You're tuning into the Carefree Valley YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.